You want to stop this run? Jack Callahan's voice cut clean through the silence of the sheriff's office. There's a 6-year-old girl dying in Redstone County Memorial right now. Her name is Emily Carter, and every single dollar we raise on Sunday goes directly to keeping her alive. So I'm going to ask you one time, Sheriff, are you really prepared to let a child die for a campaign poster? Sheriff Derek Monroe leaned back in his chair and smiled like a man who had never once been told no. That smile was the beginning of everything. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, which was the kind of detail nobody remembered later. But Jack Callahan never forgot. He remembered everything: the temperature of the air, the smell of motor oil and burnt coffee in the clubhouse, the particular quality of quiet that settled over the room when Teresa Carter walked through the front door of the Redstone Hells Angels charter, holding her daughter's hand. Emily was 6 years old and small for her age, with brown hair pulled back in 2 uneven pigtails and eyes that were too serious for a child who should have been worrying about nothing more complicated than which cartoon to watch. She wore a pink sweater with a small rabbit embroidered on the chest. She looked around the clubhouse the way children look at places they've been warned about, cautious, but more curious than afraid. Jack had been in the middle of going over maintenance logs when one of his guys, a thick-armed veteran named Paulie Rourke, knocked twice on the doorframe and said, "Boss, there's a woman out front, says she needs to talk to someone in charge, says it's about her kid." Jack set down his pen. Teresa Carter was 34 years old and looked 50. Not because she'd lived hard, because she'd lived scared, which was a different kind of aging entirely. She was the kind of woman who apologized before she spoke, who kept her hands folded in her lap like she was afraid to take up too much space. When Jack came out from the back room and introduced himself, she flinched slightly at his size. He was 6'2", 240 pounds of gray-haired calm, and then she straightened her spine and looked him dead in the eye. "My name is Teresa Carter," she said. "I live on Birch Street about 2 miles from here. My daughter Emily has an aggressive form of medulloblastoma. That's brain cancer. She was diagnosed 14 months ago, and she's been through 2 rounds of conventional treatment, and neither one worked. There's an experimental procedure being done at a facility in Denver. The survival rate for kids her age who respond well is 63%. Without it," she stopped, swallowed. "Without it, the doctors give her 4 to 6 months." The clubhouse had gone very quiet. Men who were used to loud engines and louder arguments stood completely still. "The procedure cost $280,000, Teresa continued. "Insurance won't cover experimental treatment. We've applied for every grant we could find. We've done bake sales, GoFundMe. We've called every charity organization I could find a number for. We've raised about $18,000 in the last 3 months. She paused again. "Someone told me, a neighbor, that you all did a fundraiser 2 years ago for the Hendersons when their house burned down. That you raised money for veterans at the VFW last 4th of July. They said if anybody in this county could actually move people to show up and give, it was you." Jack looked at the little girl who was studying a framed photograph on the wall of the club's founding members from 1987. "Emily," he said. She looked up. "You like motorcycles?" She thought about it seriously, the way children do when they're treating an adult's question with more respect than most adults deserve. "I've never been on one," she said, "but I think I'd like the sound." Jack crouched down so he was eye level with her. "The sound is the best part," he said. "You know, sounds like the whole road belongs to you." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Jack stood back up and looked at Teresa. "Come inside. Let's talk numbers." What followed over the next 3 hours was the kind of meeting that didn't look like much from the outside, just at a group of men and one exhausted woman sitting around a table covered in papers and coffee cups, but was in fact the beginning of something that would eventually shake the political foundations of Redstone County down to their roots. Jack Callahan had been running the Redstone Charter for 11 years. He was not the kind of leader who shouted or performed. He was the kind who listened, calculated, and then moved with a precision that consistently surprised people who had made the mistake of assuming that a man with tattoos up to his jawline and a Hells Angels patch on his back couldn't think 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. He was also beneath the leather in the stillness. Someone who had a very specific and deeply personal relationship with the concept of helpless children and broken systems. But that was a history he kept to himself. He laid out the plan over 2 hours, pulling in his logistics man, a wiry former Army corporal named Dennis Shea, who had a mind like a spreadsheet, and his PR contact, a woman named Carla Metz, who had worked with the charter on community outreach events for 4 years and knew exactly how to talk to local media without giving them anything they could twist. Here's what we do, Jack said. We run the Iron Run, full charity convoy, every charter in the region that wants and every independent rider who wants to join civilian supporters, sponsors. We apply for a proper parade permit. We get full insurance coverage. We coordinate with the county road authority for traffic management. We document every dollar raised with a third-party accounting firm. Everything above the board, everything clean, everything legal. Dennis was already sketching a route on a legal pad. We could pull riders from 8 counties if we push the word out through the network. Maybe more, though. What's a realistic number, Jack asked. 300 bikers minimum. Could hit 400 if the weather cooperates and we give people enough lead time. What about sponsors? Carla said. If we get local businesses involved, we double the fundraising without doubling the logistical load. Pledge per mile model corporate matching. Do it, Jack said. 300,000 is the target. We build in 20% overhead for operating costs. Everything else goes directly to Emily's medical fund, managed by an independent trustee. He looked at Teresa. You'd have to agree to a trustee arrangement. That means someone neutral controls disbursement. It protects you and it protects us. Teresa nodded immediately. Whatever you need, I trust you. Don't trust me, Jack said, not unkindly. Trust the structure. That's how this stays clean. She stared at him for a moment. Then she said quietly, Why are you doing this? The question hung in the air. A couple of the guys shifted in their seats. Jack looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. Because somebody should, he said, and right now, that's us. The announcement went out through Carla's press contacts on a Wednesday, and by Thursday morning, local news had picked it up. By Friday, 2 regional outlets had run feature stories. By the following Monday, the Iron Run had its own donation page, a dedicated phone line, staffed by volunteers, and confirmed participation from 11 different motorcycle clubs across Central California, including 3 other Hells Angels charters. The community response was overwhelming in the truest sense of that word. It overwhelmed expectations, overwhelmed the volunteers managing registrations, overwhelmed Teresa Carter, who sat at her kitchen table on Sunday night reading through donation messages and wept steadily for 40 minutes while Emily slept in the next room. Local businesses began calling Carla's office faster than she could take notes. A diner on Route 9 pledged $10 per registered rider. A tire shop on the east side offered free safety checks for all participating motorcycles. A hardware chain 3 towns over offered to match the first $50,000 raised dollar for dollar. Jack watched all of it from a careful distance, coordinating the machine, making sure every piece was in place, every document filed, every permit processed, every number verified. Dennis Shea had put together a 6-page operational document covering the route, the staging areas, the medical support stations, the spectator management plan, and the media access points. It was a more thorough event plan than most professional fundraising organizations could have produced. The parade permit application went into the Redstone County Sheriff's Office, standard procedure for any convoy using public roads 2 weeks before the scheduled run date. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it should be. Jack signed the last document, handed it to Dennis, and said, "File it today. Certified mail." "You expecting trouble?" Dennis asked. Jack thought about that. "I'm expecting everything to go smoothly," he said, "and I'm preparing for the opposite." He had no specific reason to expect the opposite. The legal groundwork was solid, the community support was real, the event was structured to withstand scrutiny. There was no reasonable basis for interference. But Jack Callahan had lived long enough in Redstone County to know that reason and power were not always acquainted with each other. Sheriff Derek Monroe had been in politics long enough to understand that a story needed a villain. He was running for state assembly. The primary was 11 weeks away. His opponent, a former city councilwoman named Patricia Hearn, was pulling even with him in internal polling, which was not supposed to be possible given Monroe's incumbent advantage and his carefully cultivated image as the hard-nosed law and order candidate that Redstone County voters had come to depend on. The problem was that Patricia Hearn was also presenting herself as the law and order candidate with the added advantage of not having Monroe's baggage. The quiet whispers about the county evidence lockup, the questions that had been asked twice and answered sloppily about asset forfeiture funds, the deputy who had resigned last year and refused to say why on the record. Monroe needed to change the narrative. He needed an enemy that his base would recognize, respond to, and fear in a way that Patricia Hearn simply could not replicate. He needed something visceral. He was sitting in his office on a Tuesday morning, drinking bad coffee and scrolling through the news on his laptop, when he saw Carla Metz's press release about the Iron Run. He read it once, then again. Then he called his campaign manager, a lean, perpetually agitated man named Greg Sutherland, and said, "Get over here, I've got something." Sutherland arrived 20 minutes later, read the press release and said, "A children's cancer charity run by the Hells Angels." "That's what it looks like," Monroe said. "It's also what it is," Sutherland said slowly. "The paperwork is clean. We already confirmed that the permit application came through the office yesterday. Everything's in order." Monroe waved a hand. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Monroe turned his laptop around so Sutherland could see the Hells Angels patch prominently displayed in the press release photograph accompanying a shot of Jack Callahan shaking hands with Teresa Carter in front of the clubhouse. "The point," Monroe said, "is that I have 400 motorcycles belonging to a 1%er club riding through Redstone County 2 weeks before the primary, on public roads, in formation. And I can either let that happen, in which case I look soft on organized crime, or I can shut it down, and I look like the only man in this county with the spine to tell the Hells Angels no." Sutherland stared at him. "Derek, there's a 6-year-old girl with brain cancer." "I know that. The whole county knows that. The story's already sympathetic. If I move against it correctly," Monroe said, cutting him off, "I frame it as protecting the public from exploitation. The bikers are using a sick child as a shield to run a mass gathering of criminal elements through our streets. I'm not anti-charity. I'm pro-safety. I'm protecting the residents of this county from being used." The room was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard story to sell," Sutherland said carefully. Monroe smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Greg, I've been selling hard stories my whole career. That's literally what I do." The permit denial arrived at the Redstone Hells Angels clubhouse by certified mail on a Thursday morning, 11 days before the scheduled Iron Run. Dennis Shea opened the envelope, read the letter, and walked directly into Jack's office without knocking, which was something he had never done in 3 years of working together. Jack looked up from his desk. Dennis put the letter down in front of him without a word. Jack read it. It was 2 pages. The stated justification covered approximately half of 1 page and cited 3 separate provisions of the county public events ordinance related to potential public safety risks associated with large motorcycle gatherings, elevated risk of organized criminal activity, and failure to demonstrate adequate liability coverage, the last of which was demonstrably false, given that their insurance certificate was attached as part of the permit application that had been filed and acknowledged. He read it twice, very carefully. Then he set it down on the desk. "Get Carla on the phone," he said. His voice was completely level. "And call Marcus Webb." Webb was the club's attorney, a former federal prosecutor who had been doing legal work for the charter for 7 years. "Tell him I need him here by 4 o'clock. "What do you want me to tell the guys?" Dennis asked. Jack thought about that. "Tell them nothing changes. We still run on Saturday. Everything else is logistics." Dennis nodded and left. Jack sat alone in his office for a moment looking at the letter. He picked up his phone and called Teresa Carter. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Callahan. Teresa, I need you to hear this from me before you hear it anywhere else. The sheriff's office has denied our parade permit." Silence on the other end. "I want you to understand," Jack continued, "that this changes the timeline, but it does not change the outcome. We are going to run on Saturday. Emily is going to Denver. I am going to make sure of that." He could hear her breathing. Fast, shallow, the sound of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. "They can do that," she whispered. "They can just stop it after everything, after all those people." "They tried to," Jack said. "That's different from succeeding." Another long pause. Then Teresa said, voice cracking just slightly, She asked me this morning if the motorcycle men were still going to ride for her. She said she wanted to wave at them from the side of the road. Jack closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. She will, he said. I promise you. He hung up the phone, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and got back to work. Marcus Webb arrived at 3:47 carrying a briefcase and the particular expression of a man who had already been briefed by phone and was recalibrating his schedule around someone else's emergency. He was 61 years old, black immaculately dressed in the way that former federal prosecutors always are, and possessed of a legal mind that Jack genuinely respected, which was not something he said about many people. They sat around the table in the main meeting room. Jack Dennis, Carla Webb, and 2 senior members of the charter, a man called Big Ray Torres and another called Stitch Holloway and Webb, walked them through the denial letter line by line. The liability insurance claim is false on its face, Webb said, tapping the relevant paragraph. Your certificate of insurance is in the application file. I'll request a copy of their records first thing tomorrow, and when I confirm they received it, which they did, I can prove that from the certified mail receipt. That alone is grounds to challenge the denial on procedural grounds. How long does that take? Jack asked. Realistically, emergency hearing, I can get you in front of a judge in 4 to 5 days. That puts you at Tuesday or Wednesday. Run is Saturday, Jack said. Webb nodded. I know. I'm going to file for an emergency injunction tomorrow morning. The odds of getting it granted are good. Their stated justifications are thin, and one of them is provably inaccurate. But I want to be straight with you, Jack. Even if we win, and I think we can win, we're cutting it close. What about an appeal to the county supervisors? Carla asked. Simultaneously, Webb said, I'll file the appeal request in emergency session and let them know that the media is watching. Which, he looked at Carla, which I will make absolutely certain of, she said. I also want to put the permit denial into a press statement today, Jack said. Not angry, not inflammatory, just factual. Here's what we applied for. Here's what they said. Here's why we think they're wrong. Let the community read it and decide for themselves. Sutherland had been right about one thing. The story was already sympathetic. But what Monroe had miscalculated was that sympathy, once activated in a community that was already invested, did not extinguish quietly. It grew. The press statement went out at 6 p.m. By midnight, it had been shared more than 12,000 times across local social media. 2 regional television stations ran it on the 11 o'clock news. A national biker advocacy organization called Carla's Phone at 8 a.m. the following morning, offering legal support resources and media contacts. By Friday morning, 4 days after the permit denial, Jack Callahan had received 47 calls from elected officials, business owners, community leaders, and private citizens, all of them expressing outrage and offering support. The Iron Run donation page had gained an additional $62,000 in contributions from people who had heard about the permit denial and wanted to respond. He also received, through a mutual acquaintance in county government, the first credible piece of information suggesting that the permit denial had not originated from the Sheriff's Department's Public Safety Division. It had come directly from Monroe's office. Jack had known Derek Monroe for years in the way that people in a mid-sized county inevitably know the major players in each other's worlds not well, not personally, but with enough context to form accurate impressions. Monroe was ambitious in a way that consumed him. He was smart enough to be effective and not quite smart enough to be careful. He had run his office with a heavy hand and an eye always on the next position up the ladder. Jack had never had a significant conflict with him. He'd made sure of it. The Redstone Charter kept its affairs clean, paid its taxes, and had been scrupulous over the past decade about staying on the correct side of the law. Not because the law was always right, but because Jack understood that when you wore a patch that made people nervous, the most powerful thing you could do was give them nothing legitimate to hang on you. He'd been doing that for 11 years, and now a man with a campaign to run had decided that the patch was the only thing that mattered, regardless of the facts underneath it. Jack sat in his office Friday afternoon with the information about Monroe's direct involvement laid out in front of him, and he made a decision that would define everything that came after. He wasn't going to fight this the way Monroe expected him to fight it. He wasn't going to escalate, wasn't going to posture, wasn't going to give Monroe the confrontation footage he was looking for. He was going to do something Monroe had clearly never considered him capable of doing. He was going to think. Dennis, he said when his logistics man appeared in the doorway. Yeah, boss. I need you to pull everything publicly available on Monroe's office, asset forfeiture records, budget allocations, any financial disclosures going back 6 years, county records, state filings, anything that's public access. Dennis raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of paper. Start tonight. What am I looking for? Jack picked up his coffee, looked at the permit denial letter one more time, and set it face down on the desk. I don't know yet, he said, but a man who revokes a children's cancer charity permit for political convenience is not a man who decided to do one corrupt thing. Find me the pattern. Dennis left. Jack turned to look out the window at the parking lot where 3 of his guys were doing routine maintenance on their bikes, the sound of engines and ratchets and quiet conversation drifting in from the open door. He thought about Emily Carter in her pink sweater with the rabbit on it, looking around the clubhouse with those 2 serious eyes. He thought about the sound she'd almost made. Not quite a smile, but close. He thought, you don't know what you started, Derek. And then he got back to work. Done. The emergency injunction hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Marcus Webb filed the motion Monday at 9 a.m. and by noon the county courthouse had confirmed a hearing slot with Judge Adeline Torres, no relation to Big Ray, for the following morning at 10 o'clock. Monroe's office filed a response at 4:30 p.m. Monday afternoon, 17 pages arguing that the sheriff's department had broad discretionary authority over public safety events and that the denial was within established parameters. The filing was competent, which meant Monroe had good lawyers, but it also spent 4 of its 17 pages on the history of the Hells Angels as a criminal organization nationwide, a history that had nothing to do with the specific legal question before the court. Webb read it Monday evening, called Jack and said, "He's making a political argument in a legal filing. That's a mistake." Will the judge see it that way? Judge Torres has been on the bench for 19 years, Webb said. She doesn't like it when people use her courtroom as a campaign stop. Yeah, she'll see it. Jack asked, what are our odds? A pause. Webb was not a man who inflated numbers. 70-30, he said. Maybe 65-35. It's not a sure thing. The discretionary authority argument has some merit in the abstract, but their factual foundation is weak, and that insurance claim is going to hurt them. Okay, Jack said. Go win it. He hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of the empty clubhouse. Everyone had gone home. The lights were down except for the lamp on his desk. The iron run was 4 days away. He thought about all the things that could still go wrong. The legal challenge could fail. Monroe could escalate. The community momentum could fracture under media pressure if Monroe's people worked the narrative hard enough. And then he thought about what Dennis had found in the first 6 hours of pulling public financial records. It was a thread, thin but real, a series of asset forfeiture allocations over 3 years that didn't line up, right funds seized from civilian property disputes that had been reclassified under a county account that should have gone to the general fund, but instead appeared to have been routed through a nonprofit shell entity that nobody in the public record could fully account for. It was exactly the kind of thing that looked fine at a glance and fell apart when you followed the numbers. Jack had called a contact he trusted, a man who worked in financial compliance, not in law enforcement, not in politics, and asked him quietly to take a look. The contact had called back 3 hours later and said, Jack, where did you find this? Public records, Jack said. A long pause. There's more here. This isn't just sloppy accounting. Someone built this deliberately. Give me 48 hours. That conversation had happened Monday morning. It was now Monday night. Jack sat at his desk in the quiet and did the calculation he always did when he was managing multiple moving pieces. What was the worst realistic outcome? What was the best realistic outcome? And what was most likely? The worse the injunction failed, Monroe escalated, the run was stopped. Teresa lost her last real shot at saving her daughter's life. The best, the injunction succeeded. The run happened. Emily went to Denver. Monroe's corruption was exposed through proper channels, and justice moved on its own timeline. Most likely something in between, requiring improvisation. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for something in between. He turned off his desk lamp and walked out into the parking lot where his own motorcycle sat in its usual spot. He stood next to it for a moment, one hand on the handlebar, looking up at the clear California sky. 4 days. He had built this machine, the legal strategy, the community momentum, the financial investigation, the media relationships, the solidarity of 400 riders with 4 days left to run it. He had faced worse odds. He got in his truck and drove home. Behind him, in the darkness of the Redstone Hells Angels clubhouse, the Iron Run banner hung above the bar, hand-lettered and slightly uneven, the work of a man named Tiny Wallace, who had the biggest hands in the charter and the most careful brushwork. Ride for Emily. It hung there in the dark, waiting for Saturday. The injunction hearing lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes, and Marcus Webb won it in the first 45. Judge Adeline Torres had been on the Redstone County bench long enough to recognize when a legal filing was being used as a political prop, and Monroe's 17-page response with its 4-page detour through Hells Angels national history had apparently not impressed her. She had interrupted Monroe's attorney, a sharp-suited man named Gerald Fitch, 11 minutes into his opening argument, and asked him a single question in a voice that carried the particular flatness of someone who had already made up their mind and was simply waiting for the formality to conclude. "Counselor," she said, "the permit application included a certificate of insurance. Your office acknowledged receipt of that application by certified mail. Are you disputing that the certificate was included?" Fitch hesitated for exactly 1 second too long. "Your Honor, the department's position is that the coverage levels were insufficient." "That's not what the denial letter says," Torres said. "The denial letter says the applicant failed to demonstrate adequate liability coverage. That's a factual claim. Either the certificate was there or it wasn't. Which is it?" Another pause. Webb, sitting at the plaintiff's table, kept his face completely neutral. "We would argue," Fitch said carefully, "that the coverage demonstrated was not adequate to the scale of the event." "Then your denial letter should have said that," Torres said. "Instead, it made a factual claim that appears to be false on its face. I'm granting the injunction. The permit is reinstated pending full review. Sheriff Monroe's office is enjoined from interfering with the Iron Run event as scheduled. Court is adjourned." She was gone from the bench before Fitch had fully processed what had just happened. Webb was on his phone to Jack before he'd cleared the courthouse steps. "It's done," he said. "We're legal. Saturday stands." Jack was in the clubhouse when the call came in. He listened, said, "Good work," and hung up. Then he turned to the room Dennis Bigray, Stitch Carla, and 7 other members who had been waiting in total silence and said, "We ride Saturday." The room exhaled. Bigray put both hands on the table and said, "That's what I'm talking about." Stitch, who was not a man given to emotional displays, turned around and hit the wall once with the flat of his palm, not hard, just enough, a release. Jack let them have 30 seconds of it. Then he said, "Don't celebrate yet. Monroe lost in court this morning. Men like Monroe don't absorb losses. They redirect them. Everybody stay sharp." That was Tuesday morning at 10:52 a.m. By Tuesday afternoon, Derek Monroe had made 3 phone calls that would define the next 4 days. Greg Sutherland had told him the injunction was a likely outcome. He'd said it Monday night quietly in the way that campaign managers delivered bad news they'd been sitting on for a while. Fitch says the insurance argument is weak. Torres is a stickler for procedural accuracy. We should prepare for the permit being reinstated. Monroe had listened to that and said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he said, "Fine. New approach." Derek: "I'm not done, Greg. New approach. If they get their permit back, we don't fight the permit. We fight the story. We change what this is about." Sutherland had looked at him carefully. "And what is it about?" "It's about a county sheriff," Monroe said slowly, working it out as he spoke, "who is so concerned about the safety of his community that he is personally overseeing the largest motorcycle gathering in Redstone County history. Present, engaged, vigilant, not blocking the run, monitoring it. Because that's responsible leadership. You want to show up at the run. I want to show up at the run with full departmental presence and make sure every camera in that county gets a shot of me standing between those bikers and the public. If anything goes wrong, anything, a traffic incident, a fender bender, a drunk spectator, I'm the man who was there. If nothing goes wrong, I'm the man who kept it that way." He paused. "Either outcome, I'm the story." Sutherland was quiet for a moment. "That's actually not bad." "Of course it's not bad, but there's a second piece." Monroe leaned forward. "I want pressure on the run from the inside out. I want every media contact we have running the national Hells Angels criminal history angle hard between now and Saturday. Not about this run specifically, about the club in general. I want people nervous before those bikes even start up. We can do that, but the community support for this thing is Is exactly why it needs to be complicated, Monroe said. Right now, the story is sick girl, big-hearted bikers, evil sheriff. I need to add a layer. I need the story to be sick girl, dangerous criminal organization using her as cover concerned sheriff, ensuring public safety. Complexity, doubt. That's all I need. Sutherland said nothing. Monroe said, "Make the calls, Greg." The first news cycle hit Wednesday morning. It was a segment on a regional television station, not a Redstone outlet, but a Sacramento-based channel with reach across the Central Valley that ran a 4-minute piece on the Iron Run. The piece was framed as a human interest story, but contained 2 minutes of archival footage about Hells Angels criminal cases from the 1990s and early 2000s, none of which had anything to do with the Redstone Charter or with Jack Callahan specifically. The segment included a brief unattributed quote from a law enforcement source in Redstone County describing the run as a significant public safety concern. Carla called Jack at 7:15 a.m. "You've seen it. Just now. That law enforcement source is Monroe's office. I'd bet my car on it." "Don't bet anything yet," Jack said. "Send me the transcript. And pull the station's ownership structure. I want to know if there are any political connections." "Already on it." A pause. "Jack, this is going to get uglier before Saturday." "Yes," he said simply, "it is." He was right. By Thursday morning, 2 more outlets had run versions of the same framing: the Hells Angels as criminal enterprise, the Iron Run as a potential flashpoint, Monroe as the responsible voice of caution. None of the pieces quoted Monroe directly, which meant his fingerprints weren't visible, but the sourcing pattern was consistent enough to be unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The community response was immediate and louder than Monroe had apparently anticipated. Teresa Carter's phone rang so often she eventually turned it off and communicated through Carla. Business owners who had pledged support called to reaffirm it. Riders who hadn't yet registered called to add their names. A pediatric oncologist from UC Davis Medical Center issued a public statement confirming the legitimacy of Emily's diagnosis and the potential efficacy of the Denver treatment. But the media pressure that was also doing something Monroe had correctly calculated. It was making some of the softer supporters nervous. 3 corporate sponsors quietly pulled their pledges, not publicly, not with explanation, just gone. A city council member from a neighboring municipality who had planned to ride in the run called Carla and said he needed to reconsider his participation, which was political language for "I'm not sure this is worth the heat." Jack tracked all of it. He made no public statements. He didn't argue with the coverage, didn't call out Monroe by name, didn't escalate. He simply kept moving the machine forward. And then Thursday afternoon, Dennis Shea knocked on his door. "The contact called back," Dennis said. "The financial guy." Jack looked up. Dennis sat down across from him and put a manila folder on the desk. Inside were 23 pages of financial records, a mix of county budget documents, public nonprofit filings, and what appeared to be internal financial transfer records that Dennis's contact had obtained through channels Jack decided not to inquire about too specifically. "Walk me through it," Jack said. Dennis spread the pages out, organized by date. "Okay, so Monroe's office runs asset forfeiture seizures, standard procedure. County law enforcement takes property suspected of being connected to criminal activity. It gets processed through the sheriff's department before being allocated. Over the last 4 years, the total value of seized assets that went through Monroe's office is approximately $4.3 million. Jack nodded. This was the thread he'd identified from the public records. And where did it go? Here's where it gets interesting. Dennis pointed to a column of figures. About $2.8 million of it went through normal channels: county general, fund victim restitution, standard allocation. But there's about $1.5 million that got reclassified under a budget line labeled Community Safety Infrastructure Initiative. That's a county program legitimate on paper. It was approved by the county supervisors 3 years ago as a fund for community-based safety improvements. But the actual disbursements from that fund don't go to community projects. They go to 2 nonprofits. One is called Redstone Community Forward. The other is called Central Valley Safety Alliance. Dennis pulled 2 pages to the front. Both nonprofits were incorporated in the same 6-month window. Both list the same registered agent, a guy named Paul Reeser, who used to work in Monroe's office as an administrative assistant. Both have filed minimal public financial disclosures. Both list community safety education as their primary purpose, and combined they have produced zero public-facing programs, events, or initiatives in 3 years of existence. Jack stared at the pages. Where is the money going? That's the question. The nonprofits are reporting expenses, staff, operational costs, consultant fees, but the payroll records aren't public. What my contact did find is that Paul Reeser personally pulled a salary of $84,000 last year from Central Valley Safety Alliance. He paused. For a nonprofit that has no visible programs or staff. And Monroe's connection to Reeser. Dennis pulled one more page. Reeser was on Monroe's campaign payroll in 2019 and 2021. Small payments listed as voter outreach. He left the sheriff's office in 2022, months before the Community Safety Infrastructure Initiative was approved. Jack sat with that for a long moment. Outside, he could hear someone in the main room of the clubhouse running an engine, the sound of a bike being tuned up, mechanical and steady. "This is money laundering," he said. It wasn't a question. "My contact said the word racketeering before I could," Dennis said. "This is asset forfeiture funds that should have gone to the county general fund being funneled through shell nonprofits back to Monroe's people. It's sophisticated. It's been running for at least 3 years. And it is absolutely the kind of thing the FBI Financial Crimes Unit opens cases on." Jack picked up the folder and squared the pages carefully. "Who else knows about this?" "Just us and my contact." "Does your contact have exposure?" Dennis shook his head. He pulled public records and made inferences. "The internal transfer documents, he won't tell me exactly how he got those, but he's confident they're clean." "Can we verify the key figures independently from purely public sources?" "Most of them, maybe 80%. "Then that's what we use." Jack closed the folder. "Marcus Webb needs to see this tonight. This goes nowhere else until he's reviewed it and told us exactly what we can say, what we can prove, and what we can do with it." "And then what?" Dennis asked. Jack looked at the closed folder. Then he looked up. "Then we make a decision about when to use it and how." Dennis understood the subtext immediately. This wasn't just about Saturday anymore. This was about something larger. Something that extended well beyond a parade permit and a political campaign. And the timing of when to surface it before the run, during, after mattered enormously. "You think Monroe's going to try something before Saturday?" Dennis said. "I think Monroe is a man who just lost in court," Jack said, "and who has spent the last 3 days running a media campaign against us and who has an election in 11 weeks. Yes, I think he's going to try something." "What kind of something?" Jack stood up. "The kind that gives him a news cycle. Get Marcus on the phone." Sure. Webb arrived at 8 o'clock Thursday evening and spent 90 minutes going through the financial documents with the focused attention of a man who had spent 20 years prosecuting federal cases and knew exactly what he was looking at. When he finished, he set the folder down and said quietly, "Jack, this is real." "How real?" "If the internal transfer records hold up, and I'd want a forensic accountant to verify them, but they look genuine, this is a federal case. Misappropriation of government funds, money laundering through nonprofits, potential wire fraud. The racketeering angle depends on how broadly you can establish a pattern, but with 3 years of documented transfers, you've got a foundation." He paused. "The question is what you do with it." "What are our options?" "Option 1, we take it directly to the FBI, file a referral, provide the documents, let federal investigators do their job. Pros, it's the clean play, it's the legal play. It keeps our hands entirely off the political dimension. Cons, federal investigations move slowly. You're talking 6 months to a year before anything publicly visible happens. And Monroe keeps running for assembly in the meantime," Jack said. "Correct. Option 2, we take it to the media. Give the documents to a reporter you trust, let them do the story. It comes out before the election. Monroe's campaign collapses, the public record is established." He looked at Jack carefully. "But if we do that without also going to the FBI simultaneously, it looks like we're weaponizing this for the run, which is a narrative Monroe's people would love." "So option 3, Jack said. Webb nodded. "Option 3, we take it to both simultaneously. FBI referral filed today or tomorrow. Media briefed on background with a clear embargo until after the run. They can do their reporting, verify independently, and the story publishes when it's ready, but we haven't held it for leverage." He paused again. "And separately, we keep a copy in reserve." "In reserve for what?" Webb looked at him steadily. in case Monroe does something between now and Saturday that requires us to respond with something other than a press statement. The room was very quiet. Jack said, "You think it'll come to that?" "I think," Webb said carefully, "that a man who is running a media smear campaign and has just had his permit denial overturned by a judge is not going to sit still for 3 more days while 400 motorcycles prepare to ride through his county on live television. I think he's going to escalate. And when he does, I want us to be in a position where our response is information, not anger." Jack thought about that for a long time. Then he said, "File the FBI referral tonight. Background the media tomorrow. Keep a copy of everything." Webb nodded once. "Done." He picked up his briefcase and stood. Then he paused. "Jack, I need to ask you something directly." "Ask." "Is any of this any of the pressure, the legal challenge, the financial records? Is any of it about anything other than getting Emily Carter to Denver?" Jack looked at him without blinking. "No," he said, "it's not." Webb held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded again, picked up his briefcase, and left. So Friday morning arrived with the particular charge quality of a day that knows it's the last one before something changes. Jack was at the clubhouse by 6. By 7, he had confirmed final numbers: 411 registered riders across 12 clubs, plus an estimated 200 civilian vehicles in the supporting convoy. Dennis had the route locked, the staging areas, confirmed the medical support stations staffed. Carla had credentialed 47 media outlets, including 2 national wire services and 1 major network affiliate from Los Angeles. $312,000 had been raised and verified by the independent accounting firm. With the remaining pledges expected to be processed by Saturday evening, the total would clear $340,000 above the original target. Emily's treatment was already scheduled at the Denver facility, pending fund transfer confirmation. Teresa called at 7:30 a.m. She said, "Mr. Callahan, I don't know how to... I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for 3 days." "You don't need to say anything," Jack told her. "I do," she said firmly, and there was something different in her voice, steadier, less apologetic. "I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Monroe tries to do, this already changed something. In this town, people who didn't even know each other are talking. Emily's teacher called me yesterday just to say that her whole class made cards. The hardware store on 5th Street has Emily's photo in the window. I needed you to know that before tomorrow." Jack said, "How is she?" A pause. "She had a hard week. The fatigue is bad. But this morning she woke up and asked me what time the motorcycles were going to start because she wanted to be ready early." A sound that was almost a laugh. "She picked out her outfit. She's wearing her rabbit sweater." Jack looked at the ceiling. "We start at 9, he said. Make sure she's somewhere with a good line of sight to the main row. We'll know where she's standing. She'll be at the corner of Miller and 4th. She wants to wave at every single one of you." "She will," Jack said. "Every single one." He hung up and sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Then his phone rang again, different number unknown. He almost didn't answer it. He answered it. The voice on the other end was male, low, and clearly trying to disguise itself. "You, Callahan. Who is this?" "Somebody who works in a building you've been having trouble with." "Don't ask my name. Listen." A pause. "They're planning something for tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. The clubhouse." Jack's spine went completely still. "What kind of something?" "A raid. Monroe got a county judge to sign a search warrant. Different judge, not Torres, for the clubhouse premises. They're going to execute it tonight, midnight or after. They'll say they got a tip about illegal firearms or contraband. They won't find anything because there isn't anything. But they'll tear the place apart, confiscate equipment, hold everyone present for questioning long enough to blow up your logistics for Saturday." Jack's jaw tightened. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure. I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't sure." A beat. "Get your guys out of there tonight. Don't have anything in that building they can use as a pretext. And Callahan, document everything they do, every door they kick in, every item they touch. Because what Monroe is doing is using law enforcement resources for political retaliation, and that's a federal crime too." The line went dead. Jack held the phone for a moment. Then he called Marcus Webb. Webb picked up on his first ring. Jack told him what he'd just heard. There was a pause on the other end. "Can you verify it?" Webb asked. "Want the source. The information will know if it's true by midnight." "What do you want to do?" Jack thought for exactly 10 seconds. We clear the clubhouse. Everyone out by 9 tonight. We leave the building legally clean, nothing present that isn't supposed to be there, which is already true, but we make it even cleaner. And we install cameras on every entry point, the good ones, the ones with time-stamped cloud backup. I can have an injunction ready to file if they actually execute the raid, Webb said immediately. Fourth Amendment grounds political motivation abuse of process. If they go in there tonight without finding anything, that filing goes in at 6 a.m. Saturday, and it's on every news desk in California by 8. Do it, Jack said. Have it ready. He hung up and immediately called Dennis. Clear the house. Everyone out by 9, no exceptions. Full cleanup legal. I mean, there's nothing to hide, just to make sure there's nothing present they could misrepresent. And get Tiny over there with the camera equipment from the storage unit. Dennis didn't ask questions. Done. What about you? I'll be there, Jack said. I want to watch. He drove to the clubhouse and spent the afternoon in a state of focused calm that the people around him would later describe as the most unsettling thing they'd ever seen. Not because he was cold or hard, but because he was completely, absolutely present. Every decision made cleanly. Every instruction given once. No wasted energy, no visible anger, no performance. Big Ray pulled him aside late in the afternoon and said low and private, "You know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "I keep thinking about how Monroe looked at this whole thing and saw a campaign prop. He looked at a dying 6-year-old girl and her broke single mom and 400 people trying to do something decent, and what he saw was an opportunity." Big Ray shook his head. "That's the part I can't get past." Jack looked at him. "Don't get past it," he said. "Remember it, but don't let it make you stupid. Anger makes you stupid. Keep it cold." "Like you." "I'm not cold," Jack said quietly. "I'm focused. There's a difference." Big Ray looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded and went back to work. At 11:47 p.m. Friday night, technically Saturday morning, 13 hours before the Iron Run was scheduled to begin, 4 Redstone County Sheriff's Department vehicles pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. The building was empty, every light off, cameras recording from 4 angles, time-stamped to a cloud server in Sacramento. A lieutenant named Ferris produced a search warrant and broke the lock on the front door. 14 deputies entered the premises and conducted a search that lasted 2 hours and 19 minutes. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Jack watched from a parked truck 3 blocks away, in communication with the cameras through his phone. He watched the deputies move through the building on a 2-inch screen. He watched them pull open storage areas, check behind the bar, go through the document files in his office, examine the maintenance equipment in the back bay. He watched them leave at 2:04 a.m. empty-handed. He called Webb. "They did it." "I know, I've been up." A pause. "How many deputies?" 14, 4 vehicles, lieutenant named Ferris on the warrant. "Good, the filing goes in at 6 a.m. I'll have the full documentation package to 12 media outlets by 7:30. Another pause. "Jack." "Yeah. They are genuinely trying to destroy you. This isn't just political positioning anymore. Monroe is burning resources, a judge. A search warrant, 14 deputies on overtime on a Friday night to stop a children's charity run. Do you understand what that means?" Jack watched the last taillight disappear around the corner. "It means he's scared," he said. "It means he's desperate," Webb said. "Scared men make mistakes. Desperate men burn everything down." "I know," Jack said. He sat in the dark for a moment. The street was completely quiet. 13 hours. "Marcus, whatever he does tomorrow, we hold the line. We don't break, we don't retaliate, we ride." A long pause. Then Webb said with something in his voice that was close to admiration and too honest to be mistaken for anything else, "I'll have the injunction ready." Jack put the truck in drive. 13 hours. The Iron Run was going to happen. He had made a promise to a 6-year-old girl in a pink rabbit sweater, and he had never in his life broken a promise that mattered. He drove through the empty streets of Redstone County in the deep quiet before dawn, and the only thing on his face was the same steady, cold, absolute focus it had worn all week. He was ready. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Derek Monroe had made one final decision that night, sitting alone in his office after the raid report came back empty. He had decided that if he couldn't stop the run through law, through media, through legal maneuver, or property destruction, he was going to stop it. the old-fashioned way. He was going to put his body and his badge and his entire departmental authority directly in the road, and he was going to dare Jack Callahan to move him. Jack got 4 hours of sleep on a cot in the back room of Dennis Shea's garage, which was 2 miles from the clubhouse and therefore outside the perimeter of whatever Monroe's people might try next. He was up at 5:30 without an alarm, which was how he'd always operated. His body understood deadlines better than any clock. He made coffee on Dennis's single-burner camp stove, stood in the dark garage drinking it, and ran through the day in his head the way a general runs through a battle plan the morning of not looking for flaws because the time for finding flaws was over. Just confirming the shape of it, the sequence, the decision points. Webb's injunction filing had gone in at 6 a.m. as promised, delivered electronically to the county courthouse, and physically copied to the sheriff's department, the county supervisors, and 12 media outlets simultaneously. By the time Jack finished his coffee, his phone had already received 3 text alerts from Carla, confirming that 2 television stations in one wire service had responded to the documentation package and were running the story of the midnight raid in their morning broadcasts. He called Carla at 5:58. "How bad is it for him?" "Bad," she said, and he could hear the particular energy in her voice that came from someone who had been awake for 20 hours and had passed through tired into something cleaner. "The footage from your cameras is clear. 14 deputies, a broken lock, 2 hours inside, nothing found. The legal filing frames it as political retaliation, abuse of process, misuse of public resources." And Jack, 3 of the TV stations that Monroe's people had been feeding the anti-biker narrative to, 2 of them have already flipped. The midnight raid footage is better television than the archive Hells Angels footage. They're going with it. Monroe knows the filing is out. His office received the copy at 6:03. His campaign put out a statement at 6:47. She paused. "You want to hear it? Read it." She read the statement, described the search as a routine execution of a lawfully obtained warrant based on credible tips received by the department, emphasized Monroe's commitment to public safety, and expressed confidence that the Iron Run would proceed in an orderly fashion under full law enforcement supervision. Jack listened to all of it. "He's pivoting," he said. "He's trying to get back to the oversight narrative. Present at the run and control responsible." "That's what I read too." "Let him." Jack set down his empty coffee cup. "Is Teresa set?" "She and Emily are at the corner of Miller and 4th. They've been there since 7. Someone in the neighborhood brought them coffee and a lawn chair. Half the block is out there with them." Something moved through Jack's chest, not sentiment exactly, but close to it. The particular warmth of watching a community decide who it actually is. "Good," he said. "Keep me posted on the staging area." He hung up and called Dennis. "What's our count?" 419 riders confirmed its staging as of 20 minutes ago. "Still coming in. I think we clear 4:30 by the time we roll." A pause. "Also, you should know, the roads between the staging area and the highway entrance lined, both sides all the way. People have been out there since 6 a.m. Jack said nothing for a moment. "Jack, I'm talking thousands of people. I don't have an accurate count, but I've driven the route twice and it's something." "Okay," Jack said quietly. "Okay, I'll be at staging by 7:30. He ended the call, stood alone in the garage for one more moment, and then he picked up his jacket and walked out to his bike. The staging area was a large commercial lot on the eastern edge of town that a local trucking company had donated for the event. When Jack pulled in at 7:22, he stopped his bike at the entrance and just sat for a moment, engine idling, taking it in. 431 motorcycles. He would get the final count later, arranged in disciplined rows across the lot, riders, standing in clusters, talking, checking their bikes, drinking coffee from paper cups. The sound of that many engines warming up simultaneously was not loud yet because most were still cold, but the lot hummed with mechanical potential like something enormous, breathing slowly before it decided to move. He rode through the rows slowly, and as he did, people noticed. Not with noise, there was no cheering, no calling out, just a kind of collective turn, the way people orient toward the thing they have all been waiting for. He made eye contact with men and women he'd known for years, and some he was meeting for the first time. That morning, riders from as far as Fresno and Bakersfield, and one group who'd driven up from San Diego the previous day and slept in their van. Every face he looked at had the same quality ready. He parked in the front row and Dennis materialized at his shoulder. Webb's been trying to reach you. Jack pulled his phone. 3 missed calls from the last 20 minutes, which meant he had had it on silent. He called back immediately. Webb answered before the first ring finished. Monroe has a blockade. Jack went still. Tell me. Highway 12 at the Redstone County line. The main route exactly where the convoy needs to pass. He's got snowplows, 3 of them parked across both lanes. Behind them, county sheriff vehicles. I'm getting conflicting reports on numbers, but the word is between 60 and 80 deputies, full riot configuration. Jack's jaw tightened. He can't do that. We have a legal permit. Torres' injunction is in effect. He knows that. His people are arguing that the blockade is a public safety measure. They're claiming an anonymous, credible threat of violence along the route. That's fabricated. Of course it's fabricated, and we can prove it's fabricated eventually. But eventually doesn't help you at 9 a.m. this morning. Webb's voice was very precise, very controlled. I'm filing an emergency motion to enforce the injunction right now. I'm also calling Judge Torres' clerk. Directly, she needs to know what's happening. But Jack, I need you to understand courts move at court speed. Even an emergency motion on a Saturday morning. How long? A pause that said everything. Best case, 2 hours. Worst case, we don't get in front of a judge until Monday. Monday, Emily's procedure was scheduled to begin the authorization process as soon as the funds were confirmed. Delay the run, delay the funds, delay the authorization. 2 days in a child's fight against a brain tumor was not 2 days. It was everything. Jack said, how many media outlets are at the blockade right now? At least 6 vehicles, I can confirm. Monroe called them. He wanted an audience. Of course he did. Jack thought for exactly 8 seconds he could feel the count the way he always could when the pressure was high enough. Marcus, file the motion. Call Torres' clerk. Do all of it, but understand that we're not waiting. A beat. Jack. We're not waiting, he said again calmly. Keep your phone on. He ended the call and turned to Dennis. Behind Dennis, Big Ray and Stitch had materialized the way they always did when something was about to require decisions. The 3 men who had been with him longest, who trusted his read more than their own instincts, because 11 years had taught them that his read was almost never wrong. Monroe has a blockade on 12, Jack said. Snowplows and riot police. Big Ray said, you're kidding me. He called the media first, Jack said. He wants this on camera. Stitch said, so what do we do? Jack looked at him. We give him what he wants. He told no one else what he was planning. He gave Dennis a specific set of instructions. The convoy would stage form up and begin moving at 9 a.m. exactly as scheduled, proceeding toward Highway 12 at legal parade speed, with Carla coordinating the media escort and every camera given full access. Normal. Planned. Completely by the book. And you, Dennis asked? I'll be at the front. And when we hit the blockade, stop the convoy, hold formation, complete silence. Nobody moves, nobody speaks, nobody does anything until I say so. He met Dennis's eyes directly. Can you hold 400 riders in complete silence? Dennis thought about that for a second. Yeah, he said, I can. Then do it. At 8:55, Jack sent one text message. It went to a number he'd obtained 2 days earlier through a contact in the state attorney general's office, not through anything illegal, just through the specific kind of network that a man who had spent 11 years being scrupulously clean accumulated over time. People who knew what was real and what wasn't, and who sometimes needed a way to act on that knowledge. The text contained 4 words and a file attachment. The 4 words were, this morning, Highway 12. The file attachment contained a compressed folder of financial records, the same documents Webb had reviewed Thursday night, independently verified against public sources organized by a forensic accountant whose name was on a signed certification that accompanied the package. $1.5 million. Shell Nonprofits. Monroe's former employee. 3 years. He pressed send and put the phone in his jacket pocket. Then he walked to his bike, started the engine, and rode to the front of the line. The convoy moved out at 9 a.m. exactly. 431 motorcycles in disciplined formation, 2 abreast stretching back nearly a mile along the staging route. The sound of that many engines together was not a roar so much as a vibration, something that moved through the ground and up through the feet of the thousands of people lining both sides of the road who had been standing in the early morning cool for hours, and who now, as the convoy began to move, erupted. Not into chaos, into something more powerful than chaos. They cheered, all of them, continuously, the sound building as the convoy passed a rolling wave of human noise that moved through Redstone County like a current. Children on their parents' shoulders, old men with their caps held to their chests, women holding handmade signs, a group of veterans in VFW jackets standing in a line with their hands raised. A church choir. Nobody had organized this. It had simply happened, standing on the steps of the First Methodist on Route 9, singing something that got swallowed by the engine noise, but whose intention was completely clear. Jack rode at the absolute front, alone, the gap between him and the row behind him, exactly 20 feet. Deliberate, specific, a visual statement that this was not an aggressive formation. This was a procession. This was something with dignity. He passed the corner of Miller and 4th at 9:17. Teresa Carter was standing at the curb holding Emily's hand. Emily was wearing the pink rabbit sweater. She was small and pale and tired-looking, in the way that sick children look when they're also determined, and when Jack's bike came around the corner, she raised her free hand and waved, not frantically, not shyly, but with a kind of solemn purpose, like she understood exactly what this moment meant, even if she couldn't have articulated it. Jack looked at her as he rode past. He didn't wave his hands were on the bars, but he nodded. Once deliberately, a soldier's acknowledgement to someone who had held the line. Emily nodded back, 6 years old and dying and absolutely, completely dignified. Behind Jack, 430 motorcycles rolled past that corner in 2 columns, and every single one of them, every single one slowed almost to a stop as they passed. Not because they'd been told to, because they wanted to. Because some things don't need instruction. It took 11 minutes for the full convoy to pass the corner of Miller and 4th. Teresa Carter stood the whole time not crying, just watching Emily's hand in hers, as 400 strangers paid their respects to a little girl who hadn't asked for any of this, but had somehow become the center of something that was now far larger than any of them had planned. Highway 12 came into view at 9:41. Jack saw the blockade from a quarter-mile out, and felt rather than saw the convoy adjust behind him, the subtle change in engine note that 400 experienced riders make when they process a situation simultaneously and make the same unconscious decision to slow and assess. Monroe had not underbuilt it. 3 county snow plows sat perpendicular across the highway, their blades lowered, forming a wall of steel across both lanes. Behind them, county vehicles, 8 of them parked in a secondary line. In front of them, deployed in a line across the full width of the road, 73 deputies in full riot gear, shields at their sides, not raised yet, but present, unmistakable. Monroe himself was standing 20 feet in front of his deputies. He was in full uniform, hat on, arms folded across his chest. He had positioned himself so that the media helicopters circling overhead, Jack counted 2, and there were at least 6 camera vehicles on the roadside, had an unobstructed line of sight to his face and the convoy approaching behind him. He had wanted an audience. He'd built himself a stage. Jack brought his bike to a stop 60 feet from Monroe. Behind him, in a sequence that took less than 90 seconds, 430 motorcycles came to a complete stop and went silent. Engines off one by one until the only sound on Highway 12 was wind and the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. The silence was enormous. It pressed against Monroe's chest like a hand. He had expected noise. He had expected aggression, or at least the performance of aggression. Revved engines shouted threats, something he could point to as justification. The silence was worse. The silence made him the only moving piece in a photograph, the only thing in this frame that looked like it didn't know what it was doing. Jack put down his kickstand and got off his bike. He walked toward Monroe alone. No weapon, no raised voice, nothing in his hands. The distance between them was 60 feet, and he covered it in measured strides, unhurried, while 400 riders and several thousand spectators and every camera in Redstone County watched in complete silence. Monroe watched him come. His arms stayed folded, but something shifted in his posture, a tightening, a microscopic recalibration, the body language of a man who has set a trap and is beginning to suspect that the thing walking into it is not what he expected. Jack stopped 7 feet away, close enough to talk without raising his voice, far enough that no camera could plausibly frame it as a confrontation. "Sheriff," he said. His voice was completely conversational. Monroe said, "Mr. Callahan, I'm going to have to ask you to turn this convoy around. This highway is closed for public safety reasons." "We have a legal parade permit," Jack said, "reinstated by Judge Torres on Tuesday. Your department received a copy. You're in violation of a court order right now. My department has received credible intelligence of a potential threat along this route." "That's not true," Jack said simply, "and you know it's not true." Monroe's jaw tightened. "I don't think you want to tell a sheriff what he knows." "I think," Jack said, still conversational, "that you are a man who made a calculation about this run, and that calculation has been wrong at every step. The permit denial wrong, the media campaign wrong, the midnight raid on my clubhouse wrong, and this blockade, this is the most wrong thing you've done yet because this one is happening in front of every camera in the state. You're obstructing." "I'm standing on a public highway with a legal permit," Jack said. "You're the one with snowplows in the road." He tilted his head very slightly. "How do you think this looks, Derek? To those cameras, to those voters." Monroe's face did something complicated. Jack watched it happen, the anger, the calculation, the reassessment, the anger again. "You move that convoy back," Monroe said, voice dropping lower, "or I will have every one of those riders detained for..." "For what?" Jack said. Quiet, flat. "For having a permit, for following all applicable traffic laws, for raising over $300,000 for a dying child." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "Be specific, Sheriff. The cameras are rolling." Monroe stared at him. Jack reached into his jacket pocket and removed an envelope. It was standard letter size, sealed with nothing written on the outside. He held it out. Monroe looked at it without moving. "Take it," Jack said. "What is it?" "Bank records," Jack said. "Asset forfeiture allocations, nonprofit shell filings, a forensic accounting certification." He held the envelope completely steady, arm extended. $1.5 million, Derek. 3 years. Paul Reeser, Redstone Community Forward, Central Valley Safety Alliance. He watched Monroe's face and saw the exact moment the man understood. It was not a dramatic moment. It was the opposite of dramatic, a small internal collapse, like a wall that had been stressed past its tolerance and simply stopped holding. "The FBI Financial Crimes Unit received this package 45 minutes ago," Jack continued. "So did the Sacramento Bee, the Los Angeles Times, and the Associated Press." Silence. "Take the envelope," Jack said. "It's a copy. I thought you should have one." Monroe's hand came up slowly and took the envelope. He held it without looking at it. "Now," Jack said, and his voice was completely level, completely calm, the voice of a man who has already won and is simply waiting for the other man to understand it. "You are going to order your deputies to stand down. You are going to have those plows moved off this highway, and you are going to let 431 motorcycles ride through this blockade in complete peace, because that is what the law requires. That is what that court order requires, and because the alternative..." He looked at Monroe steadily. "The alternative is that I walk back to my bike and we sit here in silence in front of every camera in California until a federal judge issues a contempt citation with your name on it. And that citation, Derek, goes on top of the racketeering referral that is already sitting in an FBI inbox." Monroe said nothing. Jack said, "I'm going to count to 10. He didn't wait for a response. He just started counting. 1. The deputies behind Monroe exchanged looks. 2. One of the helicopters banked lower. 3. Monroe's hand holding the envelope dropped slightly to his side. 4. Something broke on Monroe's face. Not loudly, not dramatically, just broke. Like a man who has been holding something heavy for a very long time and has simply reached the moment where holding it is no longer possible. 5. Monroe turned his head and looked at Lieutenant Ferris, who was standing 6 feet to his right. 6. Ferris looked back at him. There was a question in Ferris's face that was also a judgment, and Monroe read both clearly. 7. Monroe said very quietly, "Move the plows." Ferris hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he raised his radio. 8. The order went through. The snowplow engines turned over. Big, slow mechanical rumbles as 3 tons of county equipment began to reverse off the highway. 9. The deputies, without being ordered, began to step back. Not because anyone told them to, because the thing they had been positioned to hold had already collapsed, and they were law enforcement officers, not soldiers. And there was a difference that mattered to most of them in that moment more than Monroe's campaign did. Jack stopped at 9. He didn't say 10. He turned around and walked back to his bike. Behind him, the highway was clearing. He did not look back at Monroe. He did not need to. He swung his leg over his bike, put his hands on the bars, and started the engine. Behind him, 430 engines started simultaneously. The sound was not a threat. It was not a celebration. It was something more ancient and more human than either. It was the sound of people who had been told they couldn't move, deciding to move anyway. It rolled out across the California highway and up into the morning sky and out across the hills like something that had been waiting a long time to be released. Jack Callahan rode forward, and the convoy followed. They rode through the blockade in complete silence. Not engine silence, the bikes were running. The sound was enormous. But the riders made no noise. No shouts, no horns, no gestures at the deputies lining the road who had stepped back to let them through. They rode with the focused, contained energy of people who understood exactly what they had just done and understood equally that it required no performance. Monroe stood at the side of the road as they passed. He held the envelope in one hand. He did not move. He watched 430 motorcycles roll past him in 2 columns, steady and disciplined and absolutely unstoppable. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man seeing something clearly for the first time that he should have seen much earlier. The media helicopters tracked the convoy from above. Every camera on the ground was rolling. The footage that was being broadcast live, because Carla had made sure every credentialed outlet had a live feed, was not the footage Monroe had planned for. He had wanted footage of himself stopping something. What he was getting was footage of himself being passed. Jack's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket as he crossed the county line. He didn't answer it while riding, but at the first rest point, 3 miles past the blockade, he pulled over and checked. 7 missed calls, 3 from numbers he didn't recognize. 1 from Webb, 1 from Carla, 1 from a number saved as AG office, the state attorney general's office contact he'd sent the financial documents to the previous morning. He called Webb first. "It's over for him," Webb said immediately. "I just got a call from a clerk at the federal courthouse. The FBI referral was escalated this morning. Someone made a call, I don't know who, but your package went up the chain fast. The Financial Crimes Unit has opened a preliminary inquiry." Jack said, "How preliminary?" "The kind where they start pulling bank records and asking for document preservation." A pause. "Jack, that's not preliminary. That's the beginning of an indictment process. It just doesn't have that name yet." "Okay." "Also, Judge Torres is apparently furious about the blockade." "Furious. She's been in contact with the county supervisors. I expect a contempt hearing citation to be issued by end of day." "Okay," Jack said again. He looked down the road where the convoy was beginning to move again, the sound of engines picking up riders, checking their mirrors, and pulling forward. "You okay?" Webb asked. It was not a question Webb had ever asked him before. Jack thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I'm okay." "What happened out there at the blockade? The cameras got footage, but I couldn't hear the conversation." Jack watched the convoy moving. "I showed him the documents," he said, "and I counted to 9. A pause. 9. He moved before I got to 10. Webb said nothing for a moment. Then in a voice that was careful and quiet and completely genuine, "Jack, what you just did." "What we did," Jack corrected. "What we did," Webb agreed. "I want you to understand what just happened. That blockade was not a minor thing. The fact that it came down the way it came down, without violence, without arrest, with the whole thing on camera, that's going to matter for a long time." Jack didn't say anything to that. He looked at the road ahead. "Go ride," Webb said. "I'll handle the rest." They reached the fairgrounds at 11:23 a.m. The crowd that had gathered there was, even by the standards of a day that had already exceeded every expectation, something beyond what any of them had prepared for. The original estimate had been 3,000 spectators at the fairground endpoint. The actual number, later confirmed by county emergency management, was over 11,000 people. They had come from Redstone County and from the surrounding 5 counties. They had come because of the news coverage, because of the social media, because of the midnight raid story and the blockade story, and the pure, raw human narrative of a little girl and a group of people who had refused to be stopped. They had come because something in the story had touched the particular nerve that most people carry, quietly the nerve that responds to witnessing someone do the decent thing when the indecent thing would have been so much easier. Jack rode through the fairground entrance and the crowd noise hit him like a physical thing. He had been in loud places many times in his life, but this was different. Not the noise of spectacle, but the noise of feeling, the kind of sound that a crowd makes when it has been holding something and has finally been given permission to release it. He rode to the center of the fairground and stopped his bike. Behind him, the convoy flowed in around him, riders filling the space in the orderly way that a well-run operation always moves, without instruction, without confusion, each person knowing their place, because the whole thing had been built correctly from the beginning. Dennis materialized at his side. His face was the face of a man who had not slept in 36 hours and was running on something beyond caffeine, the particular fuel of watching something you built actually work. Final count, Dennis said. 431 riders completed the route. 0 incidents, 0 arrests, 0 complaints filed. He paused, and the accounting firm just confirmed the total take from today's pledges and donations. Jack waited. $347,200, Dennis said. Cleared, verified, ready for transfer to the medical trust. Jack looked at him. Emily's going to Denver, Dennis said, and his voice cracked very slightly on the last word, which was the first time Jack had heard Dennis Shea's voice crack in 11 years. She's going to Denver, Jack. Jack put one hand briefly on Dennis's shoulder. Firm, steady. Then he took it away because Dennis didn't need steadying. He needed a moment to be human, which was different. He walked through this crowd to the edge of the fairground, where Teresa Carter was standing with Emily, surrounded by about 40 people who had formed an organic, unofficial circle of protection and celebration around them. When the crowd saw Jack coming, it parted. He crouched down in front of Emily. She looked at him with those 2 serious eyes. She was tired, he could see it, the bone-deep fatigue of a child whose body was fighting something enormous. But she was also right now completely present. "Did you wave at us?" he asked. "At every single one," she said solemnly. "I counted. I waved at 429. I lost count 2 times and had to start over." 431, he said. She considered this. "I might have missed 2. "You didn't miss any," he said. "I promise." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, in the careful way of children who are asking something they've thought about seriously, "Are we really going to Denver?" "Yes," he said. "When, Charles?" "Very soon," he said. "Your mom will tell you exactly when." Emily nodded. She reached up and touched the Hells Angels patch on his vest, not grabbing, just touching one fingertip, the way you'd touch something you wanted to remember. "The man on the news said you were dangerous," she said. Jack looked at her. "What did you think?" She considered it. "I think the man on the news was wrong," she said. Jack smiled. It was a real smile, unguarded, something that came from somewhere deeper than performance. "Yeah," he said. "He was." He stood up. Teresa was looking at him and her eyes were full, and she didn't say anything because there wasn't anything sufficient to say, and he understood that and simply nodded at her, the same nod he'd given Emily from the bike that morning. She nodded back. Behind him, 11,000 people were still cheering. Somewhere in the crowd, someone had started playing music through a portable speaker. Something old, something American, the kind of song that belonged to roads and open sky. And people who kept moving even when they were told to stop. Jack stood in the middle of it all and felt for just a moment the particular weight of a promise kept. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. A G office. He answered it. The voice on the other end was professional, measured, and very direct. "Mr. Callahan, I'm calling regarding the financial documentation package you forwarded this morning. I need to ask you a few questions about your sources. Are you available to speak?" "Yes," Jack said. "Good. Because what you sent us," a pause, "we've been looking at Derek Monroe's office for 8 months, Mr. Callahan. 8 months. And in 8 months, we were 3 steps behind. Your package put us 5 steps ahead." Another pause. "I'd like to understand how you found it." Jack looked out at the fairground. 431 bikes, 11,000 people, $347,000, one little girl in a pink rabbit sweater who was going to Denver. "Public records," he said, "and paying attention." The voice on the other end said quietly, "We're going to need a formal meeting. Very soon." "I know," Jack said. "Set it up. I'll be there." He ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. The music kept playing. The crowd kept cheering. Somewhere across the fairground, Dennis Shea was coordinating fund transfers with the accounting firm, and Marcus Webb was filing contempt papers against Derek Monroe. And Carla Metz was talking to a reporter from the Los Angeles Times, and Big Ray Torres was eating a hot dog with the expression of a man who has earned it completely. And Jack Callahan stood at the center of all of it, quiet, still absolutely present. He had made a promise to a 6-year-old girl. He had kept it. But Derek Monroe was still out there. The envelope was in his hand. The FBI was in his inbox. The Attorney General was on the phone. And a man whose entire structure of power had just publicly collapsed in front of 11,000 people, and every camera in California was not finished. He was cornered. And cornered men in Jack's experience were the most dangerous kind. The meeting with the Attorney General's office happened on Monday morning, 48 hours after the Iron Run. Jack drove himself. No club escort, no Dennis riding point, no Big Ray in the passenger seat as quiet insurance. Just Jack alone in his truck on the highway into Sacramento with a copy of every document he'd sent in a manila folder on the seat beside him. Webb had offered to come. Jack had told him to stay available by phone. "You sure about this?" Webb had asked Sunday night. "They're not investigating me," Jack said. "They want what I found. I go and clean cooperative and I tell them exactly what I know and exactly how I found it. That's it. And if they push on the internal transfer documents, the ones your contact obtained through channels we agreed not to examine too closely, then I tell them I received them anonymously and I had a forensic accountant verify their accuracy before I acted on them," which is true. Webb had been quiet for a moment. "That's a defensible position." "It's also the honest one," Jack said, "which makes it easier to hold." The meeting lasted 3 hours. 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Division, one assistant AG named Reyes, who was somewhere in her mid-40s and had the focused energy of someone who had been working this case a long time and was trying very hard not to let her excitement about the new documents show. She almost succeeded. Jack walked them through everything, the public records, the pattern he'd identified, the contact he'd used for analysis, the forensic accountant's certification, the timeline of how the documents had reached him and what he'd done with them. He answered every question directly. He did not speculate. He did not editorialize. When they asked about Monroe's midnight raid on the clubhouse, he provided the time-stamped camera footage on a USB drive that he set on the table without being asked. Reyes looked at the drive for a moment before picking it up. "You came prepared," she said. "I try to," Jack said. "How long have you known about Monroe's financial arrangements?" "I had the first real indication last Friday morning. We moved immediately." "You didn't go to local law enforcement?" "Local law enforcement is Monroe's department," Jack said evenly. "And the county judge who signed the search warrant for my clubhouse Friday night is a Monroe appointment. I went to the appropriate federal authority, which is you." Reyes looked at him steadily. "Mr. Callahan, I'm going to be direct with you. Please. We have been building a case against Monroe's office for 8 months. The challenge has been following the money past Paul Reeser. The nonprofit filings are clean enough that we've been working around the edges, building circumstantial connections. Your forensic certification changes that substantially. It gives us the internal transfer documentation we couldn't subpoena without tipping off Monroe that we were looking at him." She paused. "What you provided may cut 6 months off this investigation." Jack said nothing. "I want to understand your motivation," Reyes said. "Not for the record, off the record, just between us. You ran a charity event. Monroe tried to stop it. You fought back through legal channels, you won. You could have walked away with the financial documents as insurance and never used them. Why did you move so fast? Why go to us and the press simultaneously?" Jack thought about the question. He gave it the respect of an honest answer. Because a man who steals public money from the county he's supposed to serve has been stealing it from Teresa Carter too. From every person in this county who needed something from their government and got less than they should have because Monroe was skimming it. He looked at Reyes directly. It wasn't mine to sit on. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Reyes said, "We're going to need you available for the duration of the investigation, potentially as a witness, potentially more." "I'll be available," Jack said. He drove home the long way through the back roads, windows down, the particular quiet of a man who has done what needed doing and is now simply waiting for the world to process it. His phone buzzed twice on the passenger seat. He didn't check it until he pulled over at a gas station 40 miles from Redstone. Both messages were from Carla. The first said Sacramento Bee ran the full financial story this morning. Front page online. It's moving nationally. The second said Monroe issued a statement, denying everything, says the documents are fabricated. Jack read both messages, put the phone down, and went inside to get coffee. Denying everything was, as it turned out, the worst decision Derek Monroe made in a week of bad decisions. Not because denials don't work, sometimes they do when the facts are murky enough and the political base loyal enough and the news cycle short enough. But Monroe's denial came 22 hours after the blockade footage had run on every major network, which meant the public had already formed their image of him, a man standing in the road with snowplows behind him holding an envelope, watching 400 motorcycles ride past him toward a dying child's future. That was the picture. That was the story. The denial landed on top of that picture and made it worse. By Monday afternoon, the Sacramento Bee story had been picked up by the Associated Press and was running in newspapers across the country. By Monday evening, 2 national cable news networks were running segments on the Iron Run. Not the biker angle Monroe had fed them the previous week, but the corruption angle, the charity angle, the little girl angle, the blockade angle. The footage of Jack walking alone toward the snowplows and coming back without a word exchanged, except whatever had made Monroe move those plows, that footage was everywhere and nobody watching it needed a caption to understand what they were seeing. Monroe's campaign office released 2 more statements Monday and Tuesday. His attorney held a press conference Tuesday morning that was aggressively attended and went badly. Greg Sutherland resigned as campaign manager Tuesday at noon. He did not give a public statement, but a source told the Bee he had described Monroe's decision to build the blockade as the single worst political miscalculation I have witnessed in 20 years of campaign work. He had been trying to walk Monroe back from it Saturday morning, the source said. Monroe had not listened. Jack heard all of this secondhand through Carla and Webb and the constant incoming flow of messages that his phone had become since Saturday. He processed each piece of information with the same careful attention he gave everything, filed it in his understanding of the larger situation, and kept his focus on what was directly in front of him. What was directly in front of him Tuesday morning was a problem. Dennis had called him at 7 a.m. His voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering bad news they've been sitting with for an hour waiting for a decent time to make the call. "There's been an incident," Dennis said. Jack sat up. "Who?" "Nobody hurt, but somebody put a brick through the front window of the clubhouse last night. Left a note." Jack said, "Read it." A pause. Dennis read, "You think you won. You don't know who you're dealing with. This isn't over." Jack sat with that for a moment. Did anyone see it happen? No cameras on that window, it's the side entrance. But Tiny was inside, heard the glass go went out, and found it. Nobody around by then. "Call it into the sheriff's department," Jack said immediately. Silence on Dennis's end. "Jack, I know. Monroe's people, maybe, or someone who wants it to look that way, or someone who's just angry and undirected. Doesn't matter. We called in. We document it, we report it, we let the process work. We do not speculate publicly and we do not retaliate in any direction." He paused. "Is Tiny okay?" "Shaken up, fine." "Okay, make the call, send me photos of the damage." He hung up and sat in the early morning quiet of his house thinking. The note could be Monroe. It could be someone in Monroe's orbit, a supporter, a deputy who felt humiliated by the blockade footage, someone who had been feeding on the anti-biker narrative all week and had simply acted on it. It could be someone entirely unconnected to Monroe settling a different grievance under convenient cover. What it meant, regardless of source, was that the story was not over just because the run had succeeded. Jack had understood this. He'd said it to Dennis the night of the run, standing in the fairground. Monroe is cornered, and cornered men are the most dangerous kind. He dressed, drove to the clubhouse, surveyed the damage, a clean break, single brick, professional enough in execution to suggest someone who'd done this before and amateur enough in the note to suggest someone emotional, and then sat down at his desk and made a list. The list had 3 columns, what he knew, what he could prove, and what he needed to do next. This was how Jack Callahan had operated his entire adult life, not by reaction, by structure. What he knew, Monroe was facing a federal inquiry, a contempt citation, A national media story and a campaign in freefall. A desperate man with institutional power and nothing to lose was in many ways more dangerous than an organized adversary. What he could prove, the brick, the note, the broken window, documented and reported. Nothing yet connecting it to Monroe specifically. What he needed to do next, tighten the circle and increase security at the clubhouse and at the homes of anyone who'd been prominently involved, keep his own profile calm and visible, and wait. Waiting was the part that required the most discipline. Jack was good at it. Most people weren't. Teresa Carter called him Wednesday morning, and her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before, something lighter, tentative, like a person testing whether good news is real by saying it out loud. They confirmed the transfer, she said. The medical trust. The Denver facility has received the authorization and the funds are being processed. Emily's intake appointment is Friday. Jack leaned back in his chair. Good, he said, and the word came out quieter than he intended. Teresa stopped, started again. She packed her bag yesterday. She put the stuffed rabbit in first. She has this old stuffed rabbit she's had since she was 2, and then she put her books on top of it. 3 books. She told me she's going to read while she waits for the treatment to work. A pause. She said it like it was that simple, like it was just a thing that was going to happen. It is, Jack said. I know that now. But for 14 months, Another stop. I'm sorry, I keep trying to say thank you, and I don't have the right words for it. You don't need words for it, Jack said. Just take care of her. I will. A pause. Mr. Callahan, I need to ask you something. Ask. Are you in danger because of what Monroe, because of what happened with the blockade and the financial documents? And I've been reading things. And someone broke your window. And I need to know if any of this came back on you. Because if it did, and it's because of us, because of Emily, Teresa, his voice was calm, not dismissive, just certain. Listen to me carefully. Whatever comes next with Monroe is between Monroe and the legal system. It has nothing to do with Emily, nothing to do with you, and nothing to do with the run. That's a separate thing that was true before we ever met. We just happened to find it. He paused. You understand the difference? A long moment. Then yes. Good. Go take care of your daughter. He hung up the phone and sat for a moment. Then he called Webb. Monroe's attorney requested an emergency meeting with the county supervisors this morning, Webb said without preamble. He's trying to negotiate something. We don't know what yet, but the supervisor's office contacted me to say they're aware of the situation and they're not meeting without the county council present. That's a good sign. What does Monroe think he can negotiate? My guess he's going to try to frame the financial irregularities as administrative errors. Accounting mistakes, misclassified funds, nothing intentional. It's a Hail Mary, but it's the only play he has left if he wants to stay in office. Will the supervisors buy it? Not a chance, Webb said flatly. Not with the FBI already pulling records. You don't negotiate your way out of a federal inquiry by calling it a bookkeeping error. But Monroe's attorney has to try. That's his job. Jack thought about this. Is there anything Monroe could do legally right now to complicate our position? Or the run's fundraising or the medical trust? Webb considered it. The medical trust is airtight, independent trustee, third-party accounting. Nothing Monroe's office has any authority over. The fundraising is done and documented. Your legal position is clean. A pause. The only thing he could theoretically do is file a counter-complaint about the blockade confrontation, try to frame your conversation with him as a threat or extortion. Jack felt something cold move through him. Can he make that stick? No, Webb said firmly. You handed him a document, you stated facts, you counted to 9. There were 17 cameras rolling. Every second of it is recorded and every second of it is legal. Another pause. But he might try it anyway just to generate a counter-narrative. It would be desperate and it would be stupid, but we've established that Derek Monroe is capable of both. If he files anything, Jack said, I want to know within the hour. You will. Jack set the phone down. He looked at the wall of the office, the same wall he'd been looking at all week, the same space where he'd made decisions and run calculations and held the line when the easiest thing would have been to break it. He thought about Monroe standing at the edge of the road, watching 400 bikes ride past him, holding that envelope. and he thought about what it cost a man to be seen that way, to be publicly, completely, irrevocably seen for exactly what he was. He didn't feel satisfaction about it. He felt more than anything tired. Not the exhaustion of defeat, but the particular weariness that comes after sustained, precise, high-stakes effort, the feeling of a machine that has been running at maximum capacity and is now throttling back to normal. He allowed himself 1 full minute of it, 60 seconds of sitting quietly in his office with nothing required of him. Then his phone rang. The number on the screen was one he didn't recognize. Sacramento area code. He answered. "Mr. Callahan." The voice was male, older, with the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "My name is Raymond Cho. I'm a senior correspondent for the Associated Press. I've been covering the Iron Run story since Monday. I'd like to speak with you on the record about Derek Monroe." Jack said, "What specifically?" "We've obtained records from the Redstone County Supervisor's Office, budget documents, meeting minutes going back 5 years. In conjunction with the financial documents your team provided to the FBI and the press, we're building a picture that is considerably larger than the charity run story. I want to give you the opportunity to comment before we publish." "How large?" Jack asked. A pause. "We believe the financial irregularities in Monroe's office extend beyond the asset forfeiture funds you identified. We're looking at potential bid rigging on county contracts, additional shell entity activity, and possible coordination with at least one elected official in an adjacent county." Another pause. "Mr. Callahan, what you found was the edge of something much bigger." Jack sat very still. "I need a statement from you," Cho said. "Your perspective on what you found, how you found it, and what you think it means for Redstone County." Jack thought for exactly 12 seconds. Then he said, "I'll give you a statement. Here it is. The people of Redstone County deserve a government that spends their money on them. What we found, we turned over to the appropriate authorities. Justice will follow. That's all I have to say." He paused. "Print that exactly." "That's it. That's it," There's a pause on Cho's end. Then with something like respect in his voice, "We'll print it exactly." Jack ended the call. He set the phone on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Something much bigger. He hadn't looked for this. He'd been looking for Emily Carter's ride to Denver and found a thread, pulled it because it was right to pull it, and the thread had apparently been attached to something that extended far beyond one sheriff's corruption. The federal investigation, the AP's independent, reporting the state attorney general's interest, it was all converging on something that had been happening in plain sight for years, hidden by the assumption that men like Monroe didn't get looked at too carefully. He thought about all the Teresa Carters he'd never heard of, all the people who had needed something from their county government and gotten less than they should have, because someone in Monroe's network had been skimming from the top for years. The medical care not received, the infrastructure not repaired, the community programs not funded, the quiet accumulation of small deprivations that make up the invisible cost of institutional corruption. He picked up his phone and called Dennis. "How are the guys doing?" "Honestly," Dennis said, "good. Tired, but good. Tiny got the window replaced this morning. County Sheriff's Department actually sent a detective over to take a report. First time in memory that's happened voluntarily." "Monroe's people are distancing," Jack said. "That's what it looks like. The Lieutenant Ferris, I heard he filed for a transfer to a different county department this morning." "Smart man." "There's something else," Dennis said. 12 riders called today, different charters, different states. They all heard about what happened Saturday. They all want to know if we do this kind of thing regularly, charity runs community events. One guy from Texas said his chapter has been looking for exactly this kind of purpose and doesn't know where to start. Jack absorbed that. "Tell them to call Carla. She'll put something together." "You want to do more of these?" "I want to do what needs doing," Jack said. "And right now, what needs doing is keeping our heads down and letting the legal process run. But yeah, more of these." He could hear Dennis smiling through the phone. "Copy that, boss." Thursday brought 2 things Jack had not anticipated. The first was a letter hand-delivered to the clubhouse by a county supervisor's aide, an official formal letter on county letterhead signed by 4 of the 5 county supervisors, expressing the board's appreciation for the Iron Run's contribution to the community and its commitment to reviewing county financial oversight procedures in light of recent disclosures. It was careful political language designed to acknowledge, without specifically accusing, but it was also unmistakably real. The elected governing body of Redstone County was publicly aligning itself with what Jack had done and distancing itself from Monroe. The second thing was more personal. A man came to the clubhouse Thursday afternoon, mid-50s, heavy-set in civilian clothes, khaki pants, a collared shirt, the kind of outfit that suggested he'd gotten dressed carefully for something that mattered. He asked for Jack by name. Paulie Rourke, who was staffing the front that afternoon, came back and said, "Guy out front says he knows you. Deputy? Name's Coleman." Jack frowned. "I don't know a Deputy Coleman." "He says he's the one who called you Thursday night last week about the raid." Jack stood up. He walked out to the main room. The man was standing near the door, hat in his hands, turning it in a slow circle, the way people do when they're nervous and trying not to show it. He was about 58 with a broad face and the posture of a man who had spent 30 years in uniform and wasn't sure what to do with himself without one. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "I'm Tom Coleman. I've been a Redstone County deputy for 26 years. Jack looked at him. "You warned me about the raid." "Yes, sir." Coleman met his eyes directly, which Jack respected. "I want you to know I didn't do it because of any political reason. I did it because what Ferris and Monroe were doing, using a warrant as a weapon against a children's charity, it was wrong. And I've been watching wrong things happen in that office for about 3 years and not saying anything. He stopped. "I don't have a good excuse for the not saying anything part." Jack said, "Come sit down." They sat at the bar. Jack got them both coffee. Coleman held his cup with both hands like it was keeping him warm. "You have something you want to tell me," Jack said. It wasn't a question. Coleman nodded. "There's a deputy named Vickers. He was on duty last Tuesday night. He's the one who threw the brick through your window." He said it straight, no preamble, the way a man says something he's been deciding whether to say for 2 days and has finally crossed the line. "I can't prove it. I didn't see it myself, but Vickers told 2 other guys in the department that he did it. Bragging about it, said Monroe would appreciate the message." Jack looked at him steadily. "Did Monroe order it?" "Not directly, not that I know of, but Vickers was on the blockade Saturday. He was humiliated. He's loyal to Monroe in a way that goes past professional, the kind of loyal that makes people do stupid things when they think they're protecting something. You're willing to give this information to the FBI?" Coleman's jaw tightened. "Yes, that's why I'm here. I figure," he paused, "I figure I owe it to you, to this community. I've been keeping my head down for 3 years watching things that I shouldn't have stayed quiet about, and I'm done with it." Jack looked at him for a long moment. He thought about the calls it would take. Webb to the FBI, contact the FBI to Coleman, the formal process from there. He thought about what it cost a man to walk through this door wearing that expression, not asking for absolution, not performing heroism, just showing up to do the thing that should have been done earlier and wasn't, and bearing the weight of that delay without excuse. "I'll connect you with my attorney," Jack said. "He'll coordinate with the federal investigators. You'll talk to them directly. I'm not involved in that part." Coleman nodded. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Ask." "How did you stay that calm at the blockade? I was watching from the line. 70 deputy snowplows, Monroe standing there, and you walked out alone and you just talked to him." He shook his head. "I've been in law enforcement my whole life. I've seen standoffs. I've never seen anything like that." Jack thought about the question seriously, the way it deserved. "I wasn't calm," he said finally. "I was focused. Those are different things. Calm is the absence of feeling. Focused is having feeling and knowing where to put it." Coleman considered that. "And where did you put it?" "On Emily Carter," Jack said simply. "On the fact that a 6-year-old girl needed to go to Denver. Everything else was just logistics." Coleman set his coffee cup down. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy and had just found a place to set it down and didn't quite know yet how to stand without the weight. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me come." "Thank you for coming," Jack said. "It took something." Coleman shook his head. "It took less than it should have," he said. "That's the part I'm going to have to live with." He left 20 minutes later. Jack sat at the bar alone for a while, finishing his coffee, thinking about the particular calculus of conscience, the way people calculated the cost of doing right against the cost of staying quiet, and the way that calculation always looked different in retrospect than it did in the moment. He called Webb and relayed what Coleman had told him. Webb had the FBI contact on a second call within 40 minutes. By Thursday evening, Deputy Vickers was the subject of an internal affairs investigation. By Thursday night, 2 more deputies had come forward independently to corroborate Coleman's account. The circle around Monroe was not collapsing slowly. It was collapsing fast the way corrupt structures always collapsed once the first piece moved, because they were held together by fear and mutual interest rather than anything solid. And fear dissolved the moment people saw that someone was actually coming. Jack was at the clubhouse Friday morning when Carla called at 8:47. Monroe just announced he's suspending his campaign, she said. Press release went out 6 minutes ago. He's citing personal and family health concerns and saying he intends to cooperate fully with any ongoing investigations. Jack set down his coffee. That's the language of a man whose lawyer told him cooperation is his only path to a plea. That's exactly what it sounds like, Carla said. Jack, it's done. He's out. Jack thought about that for a moment. Done was not the same as finished. Monroe still had a federal inquiry to face, a contempt citation pending, a brick-throwing deputy to answer for, and a county to account to. Done just meant the immediate threat had recognized itself and stepped back from the edge. Where's the contempt hearing? He asked. Judge Torres set it for next Wednesday. Monroe's attorney is expected to request a continuance. She paused. Jack, I've got 3 major media outlets requesting interviews with you. National. This story is the biggest thing to come out of this county since I don't even have a comparison. Tell them I'll consider it after Emily is settled in Denver, he said. A pause. You're not going to take a victory lap, are you? There's no lap to take, Jack said. A man got caught stealing from his own county. The system is correcting itself. That's not a victory, that's just what's supposed to happen. He paused. The victory is Emily Carter getting on a plane to Denver. That's the only part that matters. Carla was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, she left this morning. Jack went still. What? Teresa texted me an hour ago. She didn't want to bother you. She said you'd done enough. But Emily's intake was moved to this morning. They left for Denver at 6 a.m. A pause. She said Emily slept the whole drive to the airport, and when she woke up, the first thing she asked was whether Jack knew she was going. The clubhouse was completely quiet around him. He was alone in the main room, morning light coming through the newly replaced window, the Iron Run banner still hanging above the bar. Does she know? He said. Teresa told her you knew, Carla said. She said Emily nodded and said, good. He kept his promise. Jack looked at the banner, hand-lettered, slightly uneven. The work of a man named Tiny Wallace, who had the biggest hands in the charter and the most careful brushwork. Ride for Emily. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then thank you, Carla, for everything. Jack, I mean it, all of it. He ended the call and sat alone in the quiet of the clubhouse in the morning light with the sound of nothing in particular. Just Redstone County going about its Friday. Just the ordinary world continuing, which was the best possible outcome and the only one he'd been working toward. His phone buzzed one more time. A text unknown number, but the area code was Denver. It was a photo, just a photo, no caption. Emily Carter in a hospital gown sitting up in a bed holding her stuffed rabbit in one arm and giving the camera a thumbs up with her free hand. She was tired and pale and small, and she was smiling the smile of a child who had decided something was going to be okay and meant it. Jack looked at the photo for a long time. Then he set the phone face down on the bar, put both hands flat on the wood, and let himself feel for exactly 1 full minute. Everything he had been too focused to feel all week. After 60 seconds, he picked up the phone, looked at the photo one more time, and saved it. He had work to do. Webb needed a call. The FBI contact was expecting his formal statement by end of day. Coleman's cooperation process needed to be supported. The Board of Supervisors letter needed a formal response. The charter's finances for the next quarter needed reviewing. There were 12 calls from other clubs about future charity events that Carla had forwarded to him. There was a broken window on the side of the building that had been replaced but still needed paperwork filed with the insurance carrier. The machine of ordinary life did not pause for the moments that mattered. It kept moving. You kept moving with it. But first he sent one text back to the unknown Denver number. It said, "Tell her the road is clear." The text came back from Denver 40 minutes later. Teresa Carter had typed it herself, sitting in a plastic chair beside Emily's hospital bed, while her daughter slept with the stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. The message said, "She smiled when I told her. She said to tell you she's going to wave at you again when she gets home. She said she'll stand at the same corner. Jack read it twice. Then he set the phone in his jacket pocket and stood up from the bar and walked to the back room where he kept a small safe bolted to the floor under his desk. He opened it, took out a single photograph he'd put there Thursday night. For safekeeping the photo, Teresa had sent him Emily in her hospital gown with a thumbs up, and he set it on the desk face up. He looked at it for a moment. Then he got back to work. What he didn't know yet, sitting in that quiet clubhouse on a Friday morning in Redstone County, was that the next 3 weeks would be the most consequential of Derek Monroe's life, and some of the most consequential in the county's political history. He didn't know because he was not watching Monroe. He was watching the things that actually mattered. Emily's treatment updates the charter's finances, the outreach calls from other clubs, the slow and careful work of making sure that what had been built during the Iron Run didn't dissolve back into nothing the moment the cameras went somewhere else. But the Monroe situation was moving, whether Jack watched it or not. It had its own momentum now, the kind of momentum that only builds when multiple systems, federal law, state law, local politics, journalism, and plain human disgust all align on the same target simultaneously. It was moving fast. Ticked. The first major break came the following Tuesday, 8 days after the Iron Run. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit executed search warrants simultaneously on 3 locations: Monroe's campaign headquarters, the offices of Central Valley Safety Alliance, and the personal residence of Paul Reiser. They arrived at all 3 locations at 7 a.m., which was the kind of coordination that required significant preparation and suggested the investigation had been further along than even Reyes had let on in her meeting with Jack. Reiser was home when they arrived. He did not resist. He sat at his kitchen table in a bathrobe while federal agents boxed up computers and filing cabinets and spoke to him for 45 minutes. By noon, Reiser had called an attorney. By 3 p.m., that attorney had contacted the FBI to discuss the possibility of cooperation. Jack heard about the warrants from Webb at 8 a.m. He heard about Reiser's attorney reaching out from a contact at the state AG's office at 4 p.m. He heard about Monroe's reaction from Carla, who was tracking the news feeds continuously at 5:30. Monroe had gone completely silent. No statements, no social media, nothing from his office or his attorney after the warrants became public. The silence was its own statement, and everyone who had been following the story read it the same way a man deciding how much of the structure he was willing to let fall before he decided what to trade. Reiser is going to give them Monroe, Webb said on the phone that evening. He said it with the certainty of someone who had watched this sequence play out before. He's the smaller fish, and he knows it. He'll cooperate, provide documentation, probably wear a wire if they ask him to. 3 months from now, Monroe's attorney is going to be having a very different conversation with federal prosecutors than the one he's having now. Does Monroe know that? Jack asked. Monroe has been in law enforcement for 22 years, Webb said. He knows exactly what it means when your co-conspirator's lawyer calls the FBI. Yes, he knows. A pause opened up on the line. How do you feel? Webb asked. It was the second time Webb had asked him something like that in 10 days, which was 2 more times than he'd asked in 11 years of working together. Jack understood the question differently each time. The first time at the fairground, it had been about the immediate moment, the adrenaline, the relief, the landing after a week of sustained pressure. This time it was something deeper. The moral weight of what had been set in motion. Like I did what needed doing, Jack said carefully, and like I need to make sure I'm honest about why I did it. What do you mean? I mean, was it about Emily or was it about Monroe? Because if it was about Emily, then I did the right thing. If it was about Monroe, if part of me wanted to take him down, then I need to be careful about how I feel about this. A long pause on Webb's end, then, which was it? Emily, Jack said. But I'm human enough to admit the second thing was also true, and I don't get to feel righteous about the outcome without being honest about that. Webb was quiet for a moment. Jack, you turned evidence over to the FBI and the press. You confronted Monroe with documents on a public highway with 17 cameras rolling. You made every decision in the open. A man who was primarily motivated by taking Monroe down would have done it differently. He would have done it in the dark. Jack thought about that. Maybe. Not maybe. I've prosecuted men who operated from pure vengeance. They don't walk alone to a blockade with an envelope. They send others to do it and stay clean themselves. What you did that was in the light, all of it. Jack didn't respond to that. He was looking at Emily's photo on his desk. Get some sleep, Webb said. You've earned it. He didn't sleep. Not well. 3-4 hours broken the way his sleep always was when something large was still unresolved. He was up before 5, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in his house. Not the clubhouse, his actual house, the one he'd owned for 9 years, and still sometimes forgot to think of as home, and read everything that had accumulated in his news feeds overnight. The Reeser story was moving fast. 2 investigative journalists from the Sacramento Bee had published a new piece at midnight confirming that Reeser had been interviewed by federal investigators and that his attorney had been in contact with prosecutors. The piece contained 3 new pieces of information Jack hadn't had: that the Shell nonprofit structure extended to a third entity called Valley First Partners that had not appeared in the original documents, that bid rigging on county construction contracts appeared to be part of the investigation, and that at least one county supervisor, not one of the 4 who had signed the letter to Jack's clubhouse, was being looked at as a potentially connected party. Something much bigger, Raymond Cho had said. Jack set down his coffee and called Dennis at 5:45 a.m. Dennis answered on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake too. You've seen it, Jack said. Yeah. We're not involved in any of the contract stuff. We were never anywhere near that. I know. I want to make sure everybody in the charter knows that too. We found what we found, we turned it over, and everything that follows is the government's work, not ours. We are witnesses, not investigators. Is that clear to every single person in this charter? Crystal, Dennis said. I'll make the rounds this morning. Good. And Dennis, Jack paused. This is going to get louder before it gets quieter. There will be people who want to make us the center of this story. We are not the center of this story. The center of this story is a county government that has been stealing from its people for 3 years. Keep that frame. Don't let anyone move us into the hero position. Why not? Dennis said. It was a genuine question, not a challenge. Because heroes have to keep being heroic, Jack said. We're just a motorcycle club that did what was right one time. Let that be what it is. Dennis considered that. Okay, he said. Okay, yeah, I hear you. Jack hung up and finished his coffee and drove to the clubhouse in the early dark, passing through Redstone County streets that were still quiet, still ordinary, still just a working-class California town, going about its Friday with no particular awareness that the ground beneath its civic structure had shifted fundamentally in the past 9 days. The contempt hearing was Wednesday. Judge Torres presided. Monroe's attorney filed for continuance, citing the active federal investigation as grounds. Torres denied it in 40 seconds flat in a tone that suggested she had been waiting for the opportunity and was not inclined toward patience. The hearing proceeded. Jack was not present. Webb attended and reported back. The hearing lasted 90 minutes and resulted in a formal finding of contempt against Monroe personally and the Redstone County Sheriff's Department institutionally for the illegal blockade of a lawfully permitted public event. Torres imposed a substantial fine on the department, ordered a formal review of the permit denial process, and issued a stern, written opinion that used the word egregious 4 times in 6 pages, which Webb said was the judicial equivalent of a standing ovation for the other side. Monroe sat through all of it in his attorney's presence and said nothing publicly when it was over. Jack heard the result on the phone from Webb while standing in the parking lot of a hardware store where he'd gone to pick up supplies for a routine clubhouse repair. He listened, said good, and went inside to buy caulk and screws. Normal life, the machinery of ordinary days. That was the thing Monroe had tried to disrupt and hadn't been able to, not because he hadn't found the right lever, but because the ordinary life he'd tried to use as a weapon had turned out to be stronger than he'd calculated. 11,000 people at a fairground, a church choir on church steps, a tire shop offering free safety checks, a hardware chain matching $50,000. The ordinary, unglamorous weight of a community that had decided who it actually was. Mr. 3 weeks after the Iron Run, on a Thursday afternoon, Paul Reeser pleaded guilty to 3 federal counts of money laundering and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. As part of his cooperation agreement, he provided investigators with 2 years of documentation about the financial structure he and Monroe had built. including wire transfer records, email correspondence, and recorded phone calls that the FBI had been accumulating since the warrants executed 3 weeks prior. Jack heard about the plea from Webb at 4 p.m. He was in the middle of reviewing the charter's quarterly budget with Dennis, and he kept going through the budget after the call because the budget needed reviewing, and the plea was the system working as it should, which didn't require his attention. But after Dennis left at 6, Jack sat alone with the quarterly report closed on the desk and let himself think about Paul Reeser for a moment. A man who had taken a salary of $84,000 from a nonprofit shell that produced nothing, who had built the plumbing for a theft that had run for 3 years, siphoning resources from a county that had people in it who needed those resources for actual things, roads, services, the kind of infrastructure that made ordinary life livable. Reeser had not thought of himself. Jack suspected as someone who was hurting people. He had thought of himself as someone who was getting paid for a service. That was the particular self-deception of institutional corruption. It was always abstract. The money was just numbers. The people it should have reached were never visible. Jack thought Emily Carter was visible. That was the difference. Not that the corruption was worse in her case, it wasn't, not specifically, but she was visible. Invisibility was what had broken Monroe's calculation open. He made a note to himself to follow up with the county supervisors about the public financial reporting process. If the budget documents had been more accessible, more legible to ordinary residents, the pattern might have been caught earlier. There was work to do there that had nothing to do with the Hells Angels and everything to do with the ordinary machinery of civic accountability. He would make some calls. He knew a few people on the county budget committee, not as a crusader, just as a resident who had been paying attention and had some specific questions. Monroe's indictment came down 4 weeks and 2 days after the Iron Run. 7 counts: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, fraud, misappropriation of government funds, abuse of official position. And the count that had been added in the final 2 weeks of the grand jury proceeding based on evidence Jack had not been aware of when he filed the original documents, bribery of a public official related to the county construction contract bid rigging that the AP had identified and that Reeser's cooperation had fully documented. Jack was at the clubhouse when it happened. He found out the same way most of Redstone County found out a news alert on his phone, which he read, then set the phone on the bar and looked at it for a moment. Big Ray was across the room, working on something mechanical. He looked up. "What?" "Monroe's been indicted," Jack said. Big Ray set down his wrench and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 7 counts of 7. Big Ray nodded slowly. He picked up his wrench. "Good," he said, and went back to work. That was all. No celebration, no commentary. Good, and then back to the work directly in front of them. Jack thought, that's exactly right. That's exactly the correct response. He called Webb, who already knew. He called Carla, who was already fielding media calls and managing them with the efficiency of someone who had spent the last month building relationships with journalists and knew exactly what to give them and what to hold. He called Dennis, who said, "About time," and hung up because he was in the middle of a tire rotation. Then he did something he had been preparing to do for several days. He called Teresa Carter. She answered from Denver, where Emily was in the 3rd week of her treatment protocol. Her voice had changed again, lighter than the Tuesday she'd stood at his bar, trying not to fall apart, lighter even than the morning of the run. It had the quality of a woman who had been living in a state of crisis for 14 months and was slowly, carefully learning to breathe again. "I heard," she said before he could tell her, "how it's everywhere. My neighbor texted me. My sister called." A pause. "A reporter from CNN called the hospital looking for me." "Don't talk to them," Jack said immediately. "Not without someone with you who can help you navigate it. Call Carla. I'll text you her number. She'll manage it." "Okay." A pause. "Jack, how are you?" He wasn't used to the question coming from her direction. He thought about it honestly. "I'm okay," he said. "How's Emily?" The change in Teresa's voice when she talked about Emily was the most reliable indicator Jack had found for the girl's actual condition, more reliable than medical reports or secondhand updates, because Teresa processed her daughter's status directly into her tone before she could think to modulate it. And right now, her voice when she said Emily's name had something in it that it had not had 14 months ago or 4 weeks ago or even last Friday. It had hope, real hope, the kind that comes from evidence rather than desperation. The oncologist met with us yesterday, Teresa said. The tumor is responding. Not they're careful, they don't use the word remission, yet it's too early, but it's responding. The size is down 12% in 3 weeks. Jack closed his eyes for 1 second. That's good, he said. His voice came out steady because he made it. That's very good, Teresa. She's been doing her homework in the treatment room, Teresa said and laughed a real laugh. The laugh of a mother who is exasperated and overjoyed simultaneously, the laugh of someone who has been living in terror and is now being given back the ordinary complaints of parenthood. The nurses ask her how she's feeling, and she says fine, and then ask them if they want to hear about what she's reading. She's on her second book. Good, Jack said again. He was smiling, he could feel it, and he didn't fight it. She asks about you, Teresa said. She asks if the motorcycle man knows how she's doing. Tell her the motorcycle man knows, Jack said, and tell her to keep reading. He hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of the empty clubhouse. Then he stood up, walked to the wall behind the bar, and did something he had been planning since the day he'd received the photo from Denver. He took the photo of Emily, the one from the hospital, thumbs up stuffed, rabbit that absolute unstoppable small smile, and he hung it on the wall. Not with ceremony, not with announcement. He just hung it up, stepped back and looked at it. Then he turned away and got back to work. The day Monroe was arraigned 2 months after the Iron Run, Jack was not in the courtroom. He was in Sacramento in a conference room in the state attorney general's office, sitting across from Reyes and 2 other investigators providing his formal witness statement for what had become over 8 weeks of expanding investigation, one of the largest public corruption cases in Redstone County's history. The bid rigging investigation had pulled in 3 county contractors, a former city council member, from an adjacent district and had produced a secondary inquiry into campaign finance violations stretching back 5 years. Jack answered every question. He told the truth in every detail. He provided documentation when asked and acknowledged uncertainty when it was there. He was there for 4 hours, and when he left, Reyes walked him to the elevator and shook his hand and said, "Thank you for what you did, not just for bringing us the documents, for the way you did it." Jack said, "I just paid attention." "Most people don't," she said. He thought about that on the drive home. Most people don't. He understood why paying attention was costly. It meant seeing things that required action, and action had consequences, and consequences had weight. It was easier to look at the road directly in front of you and nothing else, to focus on the immediate and let the peripheral blur into comfortable vagueness. He had spent years being scrupulous about his own operation, partly because that was right, and partly because men with his patch could not afford mistakes. But that discipline of attention, that habit of looking at the full picture, following the numbers, asking what the pattern meant, had turned out to be the thing that had broken Monroe's structure open. Not strength, not leverage, just the discipline of looking carefully at what was actually there. He would try to remember that. It seemed like something worth keeping. 6 weeks after the arraignment, on a clear November Saturday, Teresa Carter pulled up to the corner of Miller and 4th Street in Redstone County. Emily got out of the car. She was wearing the pink rabbit sweater. She was still thin, still carrying the particular careful energy of someone whose body had been through something large and was rebuilding itself with patient determination. But her color was better. Her eyes were the same, too serious, too old, too clear, and her posture was something new. Straighter. The posture of a child who has been through the worst thing and is on the other side of it and knows it. The treatment had worked. The oncologist in Denver had used the word they had been careful with for weeks, had finally said it at a follow-up appointment 3 weeks prior, while Teresa sat across from her, holding Emily's hand and trying to keep her breathing steady. Responding well? Tumor significantly reduced. Continued monitoring required long-term prognosis, cautiously optimistic. In the language of pediatric oncology, that was as close to a promise as anyone got. In Teresa Carter's language, it was a miracle that had been built by 400 motorcycles and a man who counted to 9. She had called Jack the morning after the appointment. She had said simply, "She's okay. She's going to be okay." Jack had said, "I know." And now on a November Saturday, the Redstone Hells Angels held what they would later refer to, without official title or announcement, as the Second Ride. Not a charity event, not a public spectacle. Just a ride through Redstone County, passing the corner of Miller and 4th. It was smaller than the Iron Run. 87 riders. No media, no permits needed for a group that size moving at normal traffic speed. No announcement, no staging area. Just 87 people on motorcycles riding through town on a clear morning. Jack was at the front. He came around the corner of Miller and 4th and saw Emily standing at the curb. And he slowed and she raised her hand and waved the same careful, solemn wave she'd given him in October. The wave of a child who understood what a gesture meant. He nodded. She nodded back. Behind him, 87 motorcycles slowed as they passed the corner of Miller and 4th. One by one, the same way 430 had slowed in October. Because some things don't need instruction. Because some things the body understands before the mind has words for them. Emily waved at every single one. She told her mother later that she counted 86. She was pretty sure she'd gotten them all, but she might have miscounted at the end because she'd been trying not to cry, and it was hard to see clearly. Teresa told Jack, he said to tell her the count was 87. She had gotten every one. The photo arrived at the Redstone Hells Angels clubhouse on a Tuesday 3 weeks after the November ride. It came in an envelope with Emily's name in careful child's handwriting in the return address corner. Inside was a drawing pencil and colored marker, the kind of careful labor that children put into something they've worked on for a long time and want to be right. It showed in the slightly lopsided perspective of a 6-year-old who was trying very hard a line of motorcycles on a road, and at the side of the road a small figure with 2 uneven pigtails in a pink sweater with something round on the chest that was meant to be a rabbit. The figure's arm was raised. At the bottom, in the same careful handwriting as the envelope, "Thank you for keeping your promise." And then below that, in slightly larger letters, "I'm okay." Jack held the drawing for a long time. Then he walked to the wall behind the bond and hung it next to the photo. The photo he'd hung alone the day Monroe was indicted. The drawing beside it now slightly crooked because the thumbtack wasn't quite level and he didn't fix it. He stood back and looked at both of them. Big Ray appeared at his shoulder. At some point, Jack hadn't heard him come in. They stood there together for a moment looking at the wall. "You going to leave those up?" Big Ray asked. "Yeah," Jack said. "Good," Big Ray said, and walked away. Derek Monroe entered a guilty plea to 4 of the 7 federal counts, 7 months after the Iron Run, as part of a negotiated agreement that his attorney had been working toward since Paul Reeser's cooperation had made a trial outcome essentially certain. The plea covered racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, and misappropriation of government funds. In exchange for cooperation with the ongoing investigation into the adjacent county connections, 2 of the remaining counts were dismissed. The bribery count was not dismissed. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The Redstone County Board of Supervisors appointed an interim sheriff, restructured the asset forfeiture reporting process, commissioned an independent audit of the past 5 years of county finances, and established a new public accountability office with a mandate to make financial records legible to ordinary residents. The idea Jack had made a note about after Reeser's plea and had eventually quietly pressed through 2 careful conversations with board members over the following months. The county recovered approximately $800,000 in improperly routed funds through the civil forfeiture process, more than the original forensic accounting had identified, because the investigation had found the additional structures the APU had reported on. Those funds were returned to the county general fund and allocated by board vote to community health services. Jack read about the allocation in the county budget announcement. He read it at his desk in the clubhouse on a Tuesday morning in March, almost 5 months after the Iron Run. He finished the article, set down his phone, and picked up the quarterly budget report he'd been reviewing before the news alert came in. He finished the report. He had notes in the margins. 3 items needed follow-up. He started on the first one. Emily Carter's follow-up appointment in April confirmed what the Denver team had been saying with increasing confidence since December sustained a response tumor, significantly reduced, no new activity detected. The oncologist used the phrase functional remission and then explained carefully what that meant and what it didn't mean. And Teresa listened to every word with the attention of a woman who had learned not to take words for granted. Emily, sitting on the examination table, listened too. Then she asked the oncologist if she could go back to regular school in the fall. The oncologist said yes. Emily said, "Good. I missed a lot and I need to catch up." Teresa told Jack on the phone that afternoon. He laughed a real laugh, The kind that comes out before you plan it, the kind that belongs to people and moments and nothing else. She sounds like herself, he said. She sounds exactly like herself, Teresa said. She's been exactly like herself since January. The doctors say that's a good sign. Personality returning is one of the indicators. Give her my best. She'll want to know if the motorcycle men are going to ride again this summer. Jack thought about that. Tell her to stand at the corner and find out. Teresa laughed. I'll tell her. On the last Saturday of May, Jack Callahan sat in his office at the Redstone Hells Angels clubhouse with the door open and the morning light coming in and the sound of the charter going about its ordinary business around him, engines' voices, the clatter and rhythm of men who had known each other a long time, doing the things they always did. On the wall behind the bar, visible through the open door, were two things: a photograph of a 6-year-old girl in a hospital gown giving a thumbs up with a stuffed rabbit under her arm, and a pencil and marker drawing of 87 motorcycles passing a small figure with 2 pigtails at the side of a road, signed in careful child's handwriting, "I'm okay." Webb had called that morning to say that the county's new accountability office had published its first public financial report, or Clear Accessible, written for ordinary people rather than accountants, and that 3 local news outlets had covered it as a positive story about government transparency. He said it in the tone of a man reporting a small victory that he understood was not small at all. Carla had texted to say that 6 motorcycle clubs across California had contacted the charter in the past month about replicating the Iron Run model in their communities, organized above-board charity events with full legal documentation and community partnerships. She was putting together a template they could use. She asked if Jack wanted his name on it. He texted back no name, just a template. Dennis had come in at 7 and said there was a wait list of 12 riders who wanted to join the charter, the longest wait list in the charter's history. Jack had told him to take it carefully, one at a time, the way they always had. The machine kept moving. The ordinary work kept coming. The charter kept doing what it had always done, maintaining its bikes, serving its members, paying its taxes, keeping its affairs clean, with the addition now of something harder to name, but easier to feel: the knowledge that one time when it mattered, they had done the right thing in full view of everyone and had not flinched. That knowledge didn't make them heroes. Jack was clear on that, and he made sure the people around him were clear on it too. Heroes existed in stories. What the charter had done was real, and real things had complicated shapes. Good decisions made alongside flawed ones. Courage existing next to self-interest. The messy, imperfect, genuine effort of actual people trying to do right by a dying child and by their community and by themselves. What it made them was accountable, to each other and to the place they lived. That was enough, more than enough. On the wall behind the bar, Emily Carter smiled from her photograph and waved from her drawing, permanent and present, the 2 images hanging together like a before and after of something that had no precise name, not miracle, not justice, not triumph exactly. More like proof, evidence that what was right could be done, that what was broken could be found and named, that outlawed men in leather vests could ride into a community's worst moment and come out the other side, having left it better than they'd found it. Jack Callahan looked at those 2 images every day. Not as a monument, not as a reminder of his own goodness, because he was under no illusions about goodness. He was a complicated man who had done a necessary thing, and the distance between those 2 descriptions was where the truth lived. He looked at them because they were true, because they had happened, because a 6-year-old girl in a pink rabbit sweater had asked him if the motorcycle men were still going to ride for her. And he had said yes, and it had been yes, all the way down through permit denials and media smear campaigns and midnight raids and snowplows on a highway and federal investigations and a corrupt sheriff standing in the road holding an envelope that contained the end of his career. Yes, all the way down. Some promises in the hands of the right people were simply unbreakable. And the road, the long, clear, open American road that Jack Callahan had ridden his entire adult life, had proven one more time that it belonged to everyone who had the courage to ride it.